Grace Taylor sat alone at table 43, the table that shouldn't exist. While champagne flowed and laughter echoed through the crystal-lit ballroom at her sister's wedding, she occupied a folding chair behind a dying palm tree, hidden like a family secret. The adopted daughter, the one-armed charity case, the Blackwell family's greatest PR move and deepest shame. But when a widowed single dad named Ethan Carter saw her trembling hands and hollow eyes, he made a choice that would shatter everything. This is their story. Please watch until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Westbridge Grand Hotel had never looked more magnificent. 600 guests filled the Imperial Ballroom, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos creating a sea of wealth and privilege that sparkled under the glow of 12 Swarovski crystal chandeliers. Each fixture cost more than most people earned in a year, and everyone in attendance knew it. This was the social event of the season, the wedding of Natalie Blackwell to Harrison Worthington III, uniting two of the city's most powerful families in a ceremony that had been featured in 3 different society magazines before it even happened. White roses cascaded from 20-foot-tall arrangements stationed throughout the room. Ice sculptures of swans melted slowly near the seafood bar. A 12-piece orchestra played softly from a raised platform, their music barely audible over the constant hum of conversation, the clink of champagne flutes, and the calculated laughter of people who measured their worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships. Grace Taylor sat at table 43 and tried to make herself invisible. It wasn't difficult. She'd been practicing invisibility for 10 years, ever since the Blackwell family had adopted her from St. Catherine's Home for Children and brought her into a world where she would never quite belong. At 22 years old, Grace had perfected the art of fading into backgrounds, of making her 5'4" frame seem even smaller, of tucking her left arm, which ended just below the elbow, against her side so people might forget it was different. Table 43 sat in the far corner of the ballroom, partially obscured by a potted palm tree that had seen better days. Its fronds drooped brown at the edges, and several leaves had already fallen onto the white tablecloth. The table itself was different from the others, a folding table with a slightly uneven leg that made it wobble whenever Grace set down her water glass. While the other tables seated 10 guests each and featured elaborate centerpieces of white roses and hydrangeas, table 43 had a single small vase with 3 wilting carnations. Grace was the only person seated there. She had watched the other guests arrive, had seen them check their table assignments and make their way to their designated spots. She had watched families gather, friends embrace, colleagues exchange business cards over breadsticks. She had watched the room fill with noise and warmth and connection while she sat alone behind the dying palm tree, picking at the edge of her cocktail napkin until it shredded into tiny white pieces. The napkin wasn't the only thing unraveling. Grace had known this wedding would be difficult. She had known that being back in the center of the Blackwell universe, even at its periphery, would resurrect all the old wounds she'd spent the last year trying to heal. But she hadn't expected this. The exile to table 43 felt like a public declaration, a statement to everyone in attendance. This is where the charity case belongs. Is that Grace? The whisper came from somewhere behind her, loud enough to be intentional. I didn't know they'd invite her. Well, she is technically family. This voice belonged to someone else, dripping with the kind of false sympathy that was worse than outright cruelty. Though I heard Victoria wanted to leave her off the guest list entirely, Natalie insisted. How generous of Natalie. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Nothing says family love like seating someone behind a dead plant. Grace's fingers stilled on the napkin. She stared down at her lap, at the emerald green dress she'd spent 2 months' salary on, because she'd wanted to look like she belonged, like she deserved to be here. The dress was beautiful, a simple A-line cut that fell to her knees, with a subtle shimmer in the fabric that caught the light when she moved. She'd had it altered to accommodate her arm, with the left sleeve ending in an elegant fold rather than hanging empty. Now she felt ridiculous. No dress could disguise what she was, an outsider playing dress-up in a world that had never wanted her. I heard she's working at a library now. The whispers continued, apparently unconcerned with whether Grace could hear them. Can you imagine? After everything the Blackwells gave her, she's checking out books for minimum wage. Well, what did you expect? It's not like she could work anywhere important, not with... A significant pause. You know. Grace's jaw tightened. She knew. Everyone always knew. Her left arm, or rather the absence of most of it, was the first thing people noticed about her, the thing that defined her in strangers' eyes before she ever opened her mouth. She'd been born without it, a congenital condition that the doctors had explained to her adoptive parents in clinical terms that boiled down to one simple truth. Grace was different, and different was difficult. The Blackwell family had never let her forget that difficulty. Across the ballroom, near the head table where the bride and groom held court, Victoria Blackwell stood in a blaze of champagne silk and diamonds. At 56, Victoria maintained the kind of aggressive beauty that required extensive maintenance, monthly Botox appointments, weekly facials, a personal trainer who came to the house at 5:30 every morning. Her blonde hair was swept into an elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours and 3 hairstylists to achieve. She laughed at something Harrison's father said, her hand resting proprietarily on his arm, every gesture calculated for maximum social impact. Grace watched her adoptive mother and felt nothing. That numbness had taken years to cultivate, but she'd finally mastered it. There had been a time when Victoria's disapproval could reduce her to tears, when her adoptive mother's cold silences could make her physically ill with anxiety. But that time had passed. Now, looking at Victoria was like looking at a stranger, someone she'd once known intimately, but who had become, through distance and disappointment, just another face in the crowd. Except that stranger had the power to seat her at table 43. "Grace?" The voice made her jump. She looked up to find Mrs. Chen, the Blackwells' longtime housekeeper, standing beside the table with a concerned expression. Mrs. Chen was the only person in the Blackwell household who had ever shown Grace genuine kindness, who had bandaged scraped knees and listened to teenage heartbreaks, and never once made her feel like a burden. "Mrs. Chen," Grace managed a smile, "you look beautiful." It was true. Mrs. Chen wore a simple navy dress that complemented her silver hair, and her warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled back. But the smile didn't reach those eyes. Instead, they held something that looked like pity. "I brought you some food from the appetizer table," Mrs. Chen said quietly, setting down a small plate with cheese, crackers, and grapes. "The servers won't come around to this table." Of course they wouldn't. Grace's throat tightened. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen hesitated, then leaned down slightly. "You shouldn't have come, dear. You should have said you were sick or had to work. Anything." "Natalie asked me to come." Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. She sent a handwritten invitation. Natalie asked. Victoria arranged the seating. Mrs. Chen's expression softened with something that looked like regret. "I'm sorry, Grace. This isn't right. None of this has ever been right." Before Grace could respond, Mrs. Chen straightened quickly and walked away, as if afraid of being seen talking to the girl at table 43 for too long. Grace watched her go and felt the familiar ache of being both present and excluded, of existing in a space where even kindness had to be rationed and administered in secret. She picked up a cube of cheese and tried to eat it, but it tasted like dust in her mouth. The orchestra transitioned into a new song, something classical and romantic that Grace didn't recognize. Around the ballroom, guests began making their way to their seats as the dinner service prepared to start. Grace watched them settle into their assigned places, watched them lean across tables to introduce themselves to strangers who would, by the end of the night, exchange phone numbers and promises to meet for tennis at the club. No one approached table 43. "Ladies and gentlemen," the wedding coordinator's voice rang out through the speakers, warm and professional. "Please welcome, for the first time as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Worthington." The crowd erupted in applause. Grace clapped mechanically, her single hand making a soft patting sound against her thigh that was lost in the thunder of 600 hands celebrating two people's happiness. She watched Natalie and Harrison enter the ballroom, both glowing with the kind of joy that came from knowing your life was unfolding exactly as planned. Natalie looked stunning in a Vera Wang gown that had cost $60,000. Grace knew because Victoria had mentioned the price at least 24 times during the engagement period. Harrison beamed beside his new wife, handsome and confident in his custom tuxedo. They looked like they belonged together, like they belonged to this world of crystal chandeliers and ice swan sculptures and carefully orchestrated perfection. Grace had never belonged here. The realization hit her with a force that made her breath catch. She had spent 10 years trying to fit into the Blackwell family, trying to be grateful enough, good enough, quiet enough to deserve the generosity they'd shown by adopting her. She had molded herself into whatever shape they wanted, had swallowed her voice and her needs and her very identity in an attempt to earn the love that should have come freely with the title of daughter. And here she sat, alone at table 43, behind a dying palm tree. Still not enough. "Excuse me." Grace's head snapped up. A man stood beside her table, tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark brown hair that was slightly too long to be conventionally corporate, and warm hazel eyes that held a question. He wore a well-fitted navy suit that suggested success without ostentation, and his tie was slightly loosened, as if he'd been pulling at it nervously. In his hands, he held a plate of food and a champagne flute. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Grace stared at him, unable to process the question. No one had approached her table all evening. No one had even looked at her table, except perhaps to confirm where not to sit. And now this stranger was asking permission to join her? No. Yes. She took a breath, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. "The seat isn't taken, but you don't have to talk that." "I know I don't have to." His smile was gentle, understanding. "May I anyway?" Without waiting for a response, he set his plate down and pulled out the chair. But before sitting, he extended his hand. "Ethan Carter. I'm a friend of Harrison's. We work together at Worthington Enterprises." Grace looked at his hand, then slowly raised her own right hand to shake it. His grip was warm and firm without being crushing. "Grace Taylor." "Grace." Ethan said her name like he was testing the feel of it. Beautiful name. He sat down, and suddenly table 43 didn't feel quite so empty. Grace watched him settle into his seat, watched him arrange his napkin on his lap, and take a sip of champagne, and waited for him to realize his mistake. Any moment now he would glance around the room, notice that literally every other table was filled with groups of well-dressed socialites, and realize that sitting with the girl behind the dying palm tree was social suicide. But Ethan just smiled at her and said, "I have to admit, I've been looking for an escape route all night. These events are exhausting." "Then why did you come?" The question slipped out before Grace could stop it, tinged with more bitterness than she'd intended. If Ethan noticed her tone, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he shrugged. "Harrison's a good friend, and it means a lot to him that I'm here. Plus, I promised my daughter I'd make at least one new friend tonight." He looked at Grace with those warm hazel eyes. "Would you help me keep that promise?" Something in Grace's chest cracked. Just a small fissure, but enough to let a sliver of warmth through the ice she'd built around her heart. "Your daughter makes you promise to make friends at weddings?" "My daughter makes me promise a lot of things." Ethan's smile turned soft, fond. "Lily's 8 years old and has approximately zero tolerance for her dad being antisocial. She gave me very specific instructions before I left tonight. I had to dance at least once. I had to try the cake even if I wasn't hungry, and I had to make a new friend because parties aren't fun if you just stand in the corner looking grumpy." Despite everything, Grace felt her lips twitch. Smart kid. The smartest. Pride rang clear in his voice. Also the most stubborn, most creative, and most likely to sneak cookies before dinner, but definitely the smartest. They fell into a comfortable pause. Ethan picked up his fork and started eating, and Grace found herself doing the same, suddenly aware that she was actually hungry. The food was excellent. Filet mignon cooked to perfection, roasted vegetables with herbs, potatoes au gratin that melted on her tongue. She'd barely tasted her earlier cheese cube, but now, with Ethan sitting beside her creating a buffer between her and the rest of the room, she could almost enjoy the meal. "So how do you know the bride?" Ethan asked after a moment. The question Grace had been dreading. She set down her fork carefully, considering how to answer. The truth felt too complicated, too painful to explain to a stranger, but lying felt wrong too. "Natalie's my sister," she said finally. "Well, my adoptive sister." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Really? I had no idea Harrison had a sister-in-law." He glanced around the room, then back at Grace, and she could see him making connections. "And they sat you here?" The weight of his unspoken question hung between them. "Here." alone at the forgotten table in the corner, separated from family by 30 tables and what might as well have been an ocean. Grace's throat tightened. It's complicated. Family usually is. Ethan's voice held a note of understanding that suggested personal experience. He didn't push further, just returned his attention to his food, and Grace felt grateful for his tact. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Not the awkward silence of strangers forced together, but something quieter, more companionable. Grace snuck glances at Ethan, trying to figure him out. He didn't fit the mold of most of Harrison's friends, who were typically trust fund babies coasting on family money and connections. Ethan had a different energy, something more grounded, more real. The slight callus on his hands suggested he wasn't afraid of actual work. The laugh lines around his eyes suggested he smiled often. And the way he'd sat down at her table without hesitation suggested a fundamental decency that was rare in this world. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said suddenly. Grace tensed. "Okay. Do you actually want to be here?" He held up a hand before she could answer. "And before you give me the polite response, let me be clear. I'm not asking if you think you should be here or if you feel obligated to be here. I'm asking if this," he gestured around the ballroom, "is where you want to spend your Saturday night." No one had ever asked her that. In 10 years of Blackwell family events, no one had ever considered whether Grace actually wanted to attend the galas and charity auctions and society weddings. Attendance had always been mandatory, her feelings irrelevant. "No," she whispered. "I don't want to be here." Ethan nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. "Then why are you?" "Because Natalie asked me to come, because she's my sister, even if—" Grace's voice faltered. "Even if what? Even if they'd never been close? Even if Natalie had stood by silently while Victoria treated Grace like an inconvenient obligation? Even if this handwritten invitation had felt more like a summons than a gesture of love? Even if she sat you at table 43, Ethan finished quietly. Grace's eyes stung. She blinked hard, refusing to cry at her sister's wedding. I don't think Natalie chose the seating arrangement. But she didn't change it either. It wasn't a question. No. Natalie hadn't changed it. When Grace had arrived at the hotel 2 hours ago and checked the seating chart, a massive display near the entrance with calligraphied cards indicating each guest's assigned table, she had felt her stomach drop at seeing her name isolated on table 43. She had stood there for 5 minutes, hoping there was a mistake, hoping someone would come correct the chart and move her closer to the family. But no one had come, and when she'd finally forced herself to find her seat, the truth had become unavoidable. This was where the Blackwells wanted her, hidden away, out of sight. She had seen Natalie 3 times since arriving, once during the pre-ceremony cocktail hour when the bride had floated past in her wedding gown, surrounded by bridesmaids and well-wishers. Grace had caught her eye and waved, and Natalie had smiled, a bright, distracted smile that meant nothing. Once during the ceremony itself, when Grace had sat in the very back row of the church, watching her sister marry a man who came from the same world of wealth and privilege that would never quite include Grace. And once during the receiving line, when Grace had waited her turn to congratulate the couple, and Natalie had hugged her briefly, perfunctorily, before turning to greet the next guest with much more enthusiasm. 3 times. 3 moments that had reinforced what Grace had always known. She was connected to this family by law and obligation, but never by love. "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "That's not fair to you." Grace shrugged, trying for casual and probably failing. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "That doesn't make it fine." His voice held an edge of anger, not directed at her but on her behalf. "You deserve better than being hidden in a corner at your own sister's wedding." The words hit something deep inside Grace, some part of her that had been screaming this truth for years but had never been heard. She did deserve better. She deserved to be seen, to be valued, to occupy space without apology. She deserved a family that loved her, not despite her differences, but because of the whole person she was. But deserving something and having it were 2 very different things. Before she could respond, a burst of laughter erupted from a nearby table. Grace glanced over and recognized several of Natalie's friends from college. Sorority sisters who had always treated Grace like a curious pet, something to be cooed at from a distance but never truly accepted. They were looking in her direction, not even bothering to hide their stares. One of them, Brittany, if Grace remembered correctly, leaned over to whisper something to the others. Another girl gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth in exaggerated shock. A third actually pointed, subtle as a spotlight. Grace felt her face burn. She knew what they were saying. Probably something about how pathetic it was that she had shown up, or how awkward the seating arrangement was, or how uncomfortable everyone felt having the disabled girl at such an elegant event. These were the same women who had once asked Natalie, within Grace's hearing, why the Blackwells had adopted a broken child instead of a normal one. Natalie had laughed uncomfortably and changed the subject. She hadn't defended Grace. She never did. "Hey!" Ethan's voice pulled Grace back. He wasn't looking at the other table. He was looking directly at her, his expression serious. "Those people don't matter." "Easy for you to say." Grace tried to smile, but it felt wobbly. "You don't know what it's like to be the person everyone whispers about." "Actually," Ethan set down his fork, "I do." Something in his tone made Grace look at him more carefully. For the first time, she noticed the slight shadows under his eyes, the fine lines of stress around his mouth that no amount of smiling could quite erase. This was a man who carried weight. "I'm a widower," Ethan said quietly. "My wife, Anna, died 3 years ago. Cancer." He said the word like it still hurt, like the consonants cut his mouth. "And for the first year after her death, everywhere I went, people whispered, 'That's the guy whose wife died.' Poor man, left alone with a little girl. I heard it was terrible at the end. Every room I walked into, every parent pickup at Lily's school, every business meeting, I was defined by my tragedy before I ever opened my mouth." Grace's heart squeezed. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you because I understand what it's like to be reduced to one thing in people's minds. To have strangers think they know your whole story based on one piece of information. And I'm telling you that those whispers, those judgments, they say everything about the people making them and nothing about you." "But they still hurt," Grace whispered. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "They do. And anyone who tells you to just ignore them or not let them bother you has never been on the receiving end of public scrutiny." He paused, then continued. "But here's what I learned. The whispers only have power if you're trying to prove them wrong. Once I stopped trying to convince everyone that I was okay, that I was coping, that I was the perfect grieving widower who was handling everything with grace and strength, once I stopped performing for an audience that was never going to be satisfied anyway, the whispers became just noise." Grace absorbed his words, turning them over in her mind. How much of her life had been spent trying to prove she was worthy of the Blackwell name? How many hours had she devoted to being the perfect adoptive daughter, the girl who was grateful and humble and never asked for too much? How much of herself had she sacrificed trying to convince Victoria and Richard and Natalie that she deserved their love? All of it. She had sacrificed all of it, and she was still sitting alone at table 43. "I don't know how to stop caring what they think," she admitted. Ethan smiled, and this time there was something knowing in it. "Start by sitting up straight." "What?" "You're hunched over, like you're trying to make yourself smaller." He demonstrated, curling his shoulders inward. "I do it too when I'm uncomfortable. But right now, in this moment, try sitting up straight, shoulders back, head high. Like you have every right to be here, because you do." Grace hesitated, then slowly straightened her spine, rolled her shoulders back, lifted her chin. It felt awkward, exposed, like she was inviting attention rather than deflecting it. "How does that feel?" Ethan asked. "Terrifying," Grace admitted. "Good." He grinned. "That means you're doing it right. Growth is supposed to be uncomfortable." Despite herself, Grace laughed. A real laugh, not the polite chuckle she'd perfected for Blackwell family gatherings. The sound surprised her. It also drew more attention. Grace saw Victoria's head turn in their direction, saw her adoptive mother's eyes narrow as she took in the scene. Grace, sitting at table 43, laughing with a handsome man Victoria didn't recognize. For a moment, Grace felt the old familiar dread, the automatic response to Victoria's disapproval that had been conditioned into her over 10 years. But then she felt Ethan's steady presence beside her, remembered his words about whispers being just noise, and instead of hunching back down, she held her posture, met Victoria's gaze, didn't look away. It was Victoria who looked away first. The small victory sent a thrill through Grace's chest, tiny but significant. She had held her ground. She hadn't apologized for existing, hadn't tried to disappear. For once, she had simply been. "So," Ethan said, drawing her attention back, "tell me about yourself, Grace Taylor. And I don't want the rehearsed answer you give at parties. Tell me something real." Something real. When was the last time someone had asked for that? When was the last time Grace had felt safe enough to offer it? She took a breath. "I work at the Riverside Public Library in the children's section. It's not glamorous, and the pay is terrible, but I love it. I get to help kids discover books that might change their lives. And every single day someone asks me to recommend a story, which means every single day someone values my opinion." She paused. "The Blackwells think it's beneath me. Victoria once said I was wasting my potential on minimum wage and snot-nosed children." Ethan's expression darkened. "That's horrible." "That's Victoria." Grace surprised herself with the bitterness in her voice. "She wanted me to work at the Blackwell Foundation, their charitable organization. She thought it would be appropriate for me to give back by helping other disadvantaged children, as if my entire existence should be defined by gratitude and service. But you chose the library instead." "I chose something I actually cared about instead." Grace felt her passion rising. "The foundation is just a tax write-off for them. They host galas and write checks and pose for photos, but they don't actually care about helping anyone. I spent 2 summers interning there during college, and I saw how it worked. Everything was about optics, about maintaining the family image. The actual kids they claimed to help were just props for press releases. So you found something meaningful instead." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good for you." Victoria didn't see it that way. She said I was ungrateful, that after everything they'd given me, the least I could do was represent the family properly. Grace's voice dropped. "That's when I moved out. That was a year ago. I haven't lived in the Blackwell house since." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "That's why you're at table 43. You left." "I chose myself over the family image." Grace said it plainly, but the words carried 10 years of hurt. In Victoria's world, that's unforgivable. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the wedding reception continued. The orchestra played, guests laughed and danced, servers moved efficiently between tables. But at table 43, behind the dying palm tree, Grace felt something shift. For the first time all evening, she didn't feel alone. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. "My wife, Anna, used to say that some families are born and some families are built. She believed that the people who truly love you are the ones who choose you, not because they have to, but because your existence makes their life better." He smiled softly. Anna was adopted too. She understood what it meant to live between 2 worlds, the biological family she never knew and the adopted family who raised her. And she always said that real family isn't about blood or legal papers. It's about who shows up, who sits with you in the hard moments, who celebrates your victories and grieves your losses. Grace felt tears threatening again. "Your wife sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was." Ethan's voice roughened with emotion. "And she would have liked you. She had a rule. Never let someone eat alone if you can sit beside them. She said loneliness was the worst kind of hunger." He gestured around the ballroom. "So when I saw you sitting here by yourself, trying so hard to be invisible, I heard Anna's voice in my head, and I knew I had to come over." "I'm glad you did," Grace whispered. "Me too." The moment stretched between them, fragile and honest. Then Ethan cleared his throat and said, with forced cheerfulness, "So, children's librarian, what's your favorite book to recommend?" Grace accepted the change of subject gratefully. "That depends on the kid. Are we talking picture books or chapter books? Fantasy or realistic fiction? Kids who love animals or kids who love adventure?" "Wow, you take this seriously." "Books are serious business." Grace found herself smiling. Every kid who walks into that library is looking for something, an escape, a friend, a mirror that shows them they're not alone in their experience. Recommending the right book at the right time can change someone's life. Did a book change your life? The question was gentle, curious. Grace considered it. Several, she said finally. Anne of Green Gables. Anne Shirley was an orphan who didn't quite fit in her new family at first, but she stayed herself anyway. She was dramatic and passionate and made mistakes, but she never apologized for taking up space. Grace smiled at the memory of discovering that book in the St. Catherine's Library when she was 11. I read it 17 times before the Blackwells adopted me. It was the first story that made me feel like maybe being different wasn't something I needed to fix. Ethan listened with his whole attention, the kind of focused presence that made Grace feel truly heard. "What other books?" he prompted. "The One and Only Ivan. Wonder. El Diafo." Grace ticked them off. Stories about characters who were different, who struggled, who found their place anyway. Those books taught me that disability isn't a tragedy to overcome. It's just part of being human. Different humans have different abilities, and all of them matter. The Blackwells didn't see it that way. It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. No, to them, my arm was something to be managed, minimized, hidden. Victoria used to tell me to keep my left side turned away from cameras. Richard, my adoptive father, suggested several times that I might consider getting a prosthetic to help me look more normal. She said the last words with air quotes and barely suppressed anger. "That's bullshit," Ethan said flatly. Grace blinked, startled by his bluntness. Then she laughed, a sharp surprise sound. "Yeah, it really is. You don't need to look more normal. You're not abnormal. Tell that to the Blackwells." "I will if you want me to." He said it so seriously that Grace almost believed he would march up to the head table right now and tell off her adoptive family on her behalf. The mental image was both terrifying and deeply satisfying. Before she could respond, a server approached their table, a young woman in a crisp white shirt and black vest. She looked at them with barely concealed surprise, as if shocked to find anyone actually sitting at table 43. "Can I get you anything from the bar?" she asked, directing the question primarily at Ethan. "I'll have another champagne," Ethan said, then looked at Grace. "What would you like?" Grace hesitated. She'd been sipping water all evening, afraid to order alcohol in case the Blackwells saw it as ungrateful or inappropriate or any of the other vague criticisms they'd leveled at her over the years. But she wasn't living under their roof anymore. She wasn't subject to their rules. "White wine, please," she said firmly. "Sauvignon Blanc, if you have it." The server nodded and disappeared. Ethan smiled at her. "Good choice." "I have no idea if it's a good choice," Grace admitted. "I don't know anything about wine. I just liked how it sounded." Ethan laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something in Grace's chest feel lighter. "That's the best reason to order anything. Forget the people who pretend to know about tannins and notes of oak. If you like how it tastes, it's good wine." They fell back into conversation, and Grace was surprised by how easy it was. Ethan asked about her favorite authors, and she asked about his work. She learned that he was a senior project manager at Worthington Enterprises, that he'd worked his way up from an entry-level position after college, that he'd met Harrison during a company restructuring and they'd become friends over shared frustration with corporate bureaucracy. "Harrison's actually a good guy," Ethan said. "I know he comes from money, and sometimes he can be a bit oblivious to his privilege. But he's genuine. He works hard, he cares about his employees, and he treats people with respect regardless of their position." He paused. "Though I have to admit I'm reassessing his judgment a bit after seeing this seating arrangement." "It's not Harrison's fault," Grace said automatically, then stopped. Why was she defending him? Harrison had been part of the Blackwell orbit for 2 years. He'd attended family dinners, holiday gatherings, countless events where Grace had been present, yet ignored. If he was as observant as Ethan claimed, he had to have noticed how the family treated her, and he'd said nothing. "Maybe it's not his fault," Ethan allowed, "but it's happening at his wedding, which means, on some level, he approved it." Grace hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on Victoria's role in orchestrating her exile that she hadn't considered Natalie and Harrison's complicity. They had reviewed the seating chart. They had approved every detail of this wedding, from the flower arrangements to the menu to the placement of each guest, which meant they had seen Grace assigned to table 43 and decided it was fine. The realization stung in a way she hadn't expected. Their drinks arrived, and Grace took a grateful sip of wine. It was crisp and slightly tart, exactly what she needed. Ethan raised his champagne glass. "To making new friends at terrible parties," he said. Grace clinked her glass against his. "To people who refuse to let you eat alone." They drank, and Grace felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Maybe this evening wouldn't be completely unbearable. Maybe... "Grace?" The voice cut through her tentative peace like a knife. Grace turned to find Victoria Blackwell standing beside their table, her expression frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Up close, her adoptive mother looked even more intimidating, all sharp angles and expensive beauty, with ice-blue eyes that had never looked at Grace with warmth. "Mother," the word felt foreign on Grace's tongue. She hadn't called Victoria that in over a year. Victoria's gaze flicked to Ethan, assessing him in one quick sweep. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Victoria Blackwell, the mother of the bride." Ethan stood, ever polite, and extended his hand. "Ethan Carter. I'm a colleague of Harrison's." "How lovely." Victoria's tone suggested it was anything but. She accepted his handshake briefly, then returned her attention to Grace. "Darling, could I speak with you for a moment, privately?" It wasn't a request. Grace felt her stomach clench, the old familiar dread rising, but when she glanced at Ethan, he gave her a small, encouraging nod. "You don't have to make yourself smaller." Grace stood, keeping her shoulders back, her head high. "Of course." Victoria led her away from table 43, past the dying palm tree, to a quieter corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the hotel's gardens. The sun had set while they ate, and now the gardens were lit with strings of fairy lights that created an almost magical atmosphere. Inside the ballroom, magic was in shorter supply. "Grace," Victoria's voice was low, controlled. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm sorry?" "Don't play coy. You're sitting with one of Harrison's colleagues, making a spectacle of yourself. People are talking." "People are always talking," Grace said quietly. "Usually about where you seated me." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Your seat was carefully chosen. I thought you'd prefer to be somewhere quiet, away from the crowds. You always said you didn't enjoy these large gatherings." It was such a blatant lie that Grace almost laughed. She had never said she enjoyed being isolated and excluded. She had said she found large crowds overwhelming, a reasonable statement from someone with social anxiety that had developed after 10 years of being treated as an outsider in her own family. Victoria had twisted that vulnerability into justification for public humiliation. "Table 43 is behind a dying plant," Grace said evenly. "I'm the only person sitting there, or I was, until Ethan joined me." "Yes, about that." Victoria's smile turned sharp. "I don't think it's appropriate for you to be monopolizing one of the groom's business associates. He should be networking, not playing babysitter to..." "To what?" Grace interrupted, surprising herself. "To me?" Victoria's lips thinned. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Grace felt something building inside her. Anger, yes, but also something more powerful. Clarity. "You've spent 10 years showing me exactly what you think of me. I was your charitable donation, your good deed, the disabled orphan you rescued to make yourselves look compassionate and socially conscious." "That's not fair." "The adoption announcement was featured in 3 newspapers," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger. "You gave interviews about your decision to give a special needs child a chance at a better life. You hosted a gala to raise money for St. Catherine's and used me as the centerpiece, literally. I stood on that stage while you told everyone how generous you were, how much you were sacrificing to take in a child like me." "We did sacrifice," Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. "Do you have any idea how much we've spent on your care? The medical appointments, the occupational therapy, the adaptive equipment. We gave you every opportunity." "You gave me a room and food and clothes," Grace said, "the bare minimum required by law. What you didn't give me was love, or respect, or even basic human dignity." Victoria's face flushed. "How dare you, after everything we've done for you?" "What have you done for me?" Grace demanded. "Really? Have you ever asked what I wanted, what I needed? Have you ever celebrated my achievements or comforted me when I was struggling? Have you ever treated me like a daughter instead of a project? We took you in when no one else would. Because I was convenient." The words exploded out of Grace, loud enough that several nearby guests turned to look. She didn't care. Your company was under fire for mass layoffs, your public image was suffering, and suddenly adopting a disabled orphan seemed like great PR. It made you look compassionate and caring, and it distracted from the hundreds of families you'd destroyed. Victoria's face went pale, then red. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? Grace felt 10 years of silence, truth pouring out. I was 12 when you adopted me, Victoria. Not stupid. I heard the conversations, I read the news articles, I saw the before and after of your company's reputation, and I've spent a decade being your redemption story. You're proof that you're good people despite all evidence to the contrary. You're being hysterical. I'm being honest. Grace's voice steadied. And you can't stand it because the truth doesn't fit the story you've been telling. The story where you're the benevolent benefactor and I'm the grateful recipient who should spend her life thanking you for basic human decency. Victoria drew herself up, every inch the powerful socialite accustomed to being obeyed. This conversation is over. You will return to your seat, you will stop embarrassing this family, and tomorrow you and I will have a discussion about your attitude. No. The single word hung in the air between them. Excuse me? Victoria's voice could have frozen water. No, Grace repeated. I won't return to table 43 to hide while you pretend I don't exist. I won't stop embarrassing you by simply being visible. And tomorrow we won't have a discussion about my attitude because I'm done letting you make me feel guilty for existing. If you walk away from this family, I already did, a year ago, when I moved out. Grace's voice was quiet now, but firm. The only reason I came tonight was because Natalie asked me to, but I see now that even that was hollow. She asked me to come so she could tell herself she'd been generous, that she'd included me, but she didn't actually want me here. None of you did. Victoria's expression shifted, just for a moment. Something like guilt flickered across her perfect features. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. You're right, we didn't want you here. We invited you out of obligation, out of the need to maintain appearances. Did you really think anyone cared if you showed up or not? The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But Grace had spent a year learning to survive without the Blackwells' approval, and she wasn't going to crumble now. No, she said softly. I didn't think you cared. I hoped Natalie might, but I was wrong. She took a breath. I'm going to go now. I'll send Natalie a gift and my congratulations. But I won't be attending any more family events, not because I'm ungrateful, but because I deserve better than being treated like a burden you're obligated to carry. She turned to walk away, but Victoria caught her arm, her left arm, the one that ended below the elbow. Grace flinched, and Victoria immediately released her, as if burned. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and for a moment she actually sounded it. Grace, She trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. This isn't how I wanted things to be. Grace looked at her adoptive mother and saw, perhaps for the first time, a woman who was trapped by her own choices. Victoria had built her entire identity around appearances, around maintaining a perfect image for the public. She had sacrificed genuine connection for social standing, and now she didn't know how to bridge the gap between who she pretended to be and who she actually was. It almost made Grace feel sorry for her. Almost. It doesn't matter what you wanted, Grace said gently. What matters is what you did. And what you did was make me feel unwanted and unwelcome for 10 years. That's not something I can forgive with one apology. She walked away before Victoria could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. She was shaking, from adrenaline, from fear, from relief. She had finally said the things she'd been holding inside for a decade, and the world hadn't ended. The ceiling hadn't collapsed. Victoria hadn't magically transformed into a loving mother. She had simply told the truth, and the truth had set her free. When she returned to table 43, Ethan stood immediately, concern clear on his face. Are you okay? Grace sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. I think I just burned every bridge I had with my adoptive family. Did you mean what you said? She thought about the question, then nodded. Every word. Then you did the right thing. Ethan sat beside her. Sometimes bridges need to burn so you can build something better. Grace looked at him, this stranger who had wandered over to her isolated table and ended up witnessing her entire world shift. Thank you, she said, for sitting with me tonight, for reminding me that I don't have to make myself smaller to make other people comfortable, for just seeing me. You're easy to see, Grace, Ethan said simply. You just needed people to actually look. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Grace and Ethan remained at table 43, talking and laughing while the wedding reception swirled around them. They watched the first dance, ate wedding cake, and carefully avoided looking at the head table where Grace could feel Victoria's glacial stare. Around 10 o'clock, as the party began winding down and guests started making their way to the exits, Ethan turned to Grace with a serious expression. Can I ask you something? Of course. What are you doing after this? Tonight, I mean. Where are you going? Grace blinked, surprised by the question. Home. I have an apartment about 20 minutes from here. So you have somewhere safe to go? Somewhere that's yours? His concern touched something deep in Grace's chest. Yes, I'm okay, Ethan. I have my own place, my own life. I'm not dependent on the Blackwells anymore. He nodded, visibly relieved. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Would you give me your number? I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay. Make sure you're really okay after tonight. Grace gave him her number and he immediately sent her a text so she'd have his. Then he smiled at her, that warm, genuine smile that had made Table 43 feel a little less lonely. My daughter's going to want to hear all about the new friend I made tonight, he said. She takes her assigned friendship missions very seriously. Despite everything, Grace laughed. Tell Lily she has excellent taste in giving instructions. I will. Ethan stood and offered his hand to help her up. Come on, let me walk you out. They made their way through the thinning crowd, past tables littered with half-empty champagne glasses and crumpled napkins, past the wilting flower arrangements and melting ice sculptures. As they reached the exit, Grace glanced back one last time at the Imperial Ballroom, at the crystal chandeliers and the perfect people and the world she had never quite belonged to. Then she walked out the door and didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Ethan waited with her while the valet brought her car around, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that looked painfully out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs. But Grace didn't feel embarrassed. For the first time in 10 years, she felt proud of what she'd built for herself. A small apartment, a job she loved, a life that was entirely her own. Drive safely, Ethan said as she opened her car door. And Grace, don't let tonight make you regret speaking your truth. Some people need to hear hard things. Even if they don't want to listen? Grace asked. Especially then. He smiled. Text me when you get home so I know you made it okay. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. That's what friends do. Friends. The word settled into Grace's heart like a promise. Okay, I will. She drove away from the Westbridge Grand Hotel, watching Ethan's figure grow smaller in her rearview mirror until he disappeared entirely. The city lights blurred past her window, familiar streets leading her back to the life she'd chosen, the one that didn't include crystal chandeliers or dying palm trees, or Table 43. When she pulled into her apartment complex 20 minutes later, Grace sat in her car for a moment, processing everything that had happened. The humiliation of Table 43, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the confrontation with Victoria, the truth finally spoken after years of silence. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but underneath the fatigue she felt something else. Lightness. As if the burden she'd been carrying for 10 years had finally been set down. She pulled out her phone and texted Ethan. Made it home safe. Thank you for tonight. For everything. His response came almost immediately. Glad you're home. Get some rest. And Grace, you were the bravest person in that ballroom tonight. Don't forget that. Grace read the message 3 times, feeling tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had called her brave? When was the last time someone had celebrated her strength instead of treating it as an inconvenience? She got out of the car and made her way up to her second-floor apartment, a cozy one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every book, every cheerful throw pillow had been chosen by her, paid for by her own work. The Blackwells had given her luxury, but she had built herself a home. Grace changed out of her emerald dress and into soft pajamas, washed her face, and climbed into bed. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of her apartment building settling for the night, she thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She had lost the Blackwell name, the social connections, the financial security that came with being part of a wealthy family. She had lost whatever tenuous relationship she'd had with Natalie and any hope of Victoria's approval, but she had gained herself, her voice, her dignity, her right to exist without apology. And tomorrow, she would wake up in her own home, go to her job at the library, and continue building the life she wanted, not the life someone else thought she should want. For the first time since the wedding invitation had arrived 3 months ago, Grace felt peace. She fell asleep thinking about Table 43, about Ethan Carter and his wisdom, about bridges burning and new paths opening, and about the strange and unexpected ways that sometimes the worst moments become the catalyst for the best changes. Grace woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the distant sound of children playing in the apartment complex courtyard. For a moment she lay still, letting the memories of the previous night wash over her. The wedding, Table 43, Victoria's face when Grace had finally spoken her truth, Ethan's kindness. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Grace reached for it, expecting a message from her coworker at the library or maybe a notification from her bank app. Instead, she found 3 texts from Ethan sent over the course of the morning. The first had arrived at 7:30. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. Lily wants to know if you like pancakes." The second came at 8:15. She's very insistent about the pancake question. Apparently, it's important information about new friends. The third, sent just 5 minutes ago, no pressure to respond, just wanted to check in. Grace felt a smile tug at her lips. She typed back, "Good morning. I slept surprisingly well, and yes, I love pancakes." Why does Lily need to know? The response was almost immediate. "Because we're making them right now, and she insisted I ask if you wanted to come over. I told her it was too early to invite someone over on a Sunday morning, but she said real friends share breakfast. I'm outvoted in my own house." Grace sat up in bed, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Was Ethan actually inviting her to breakfast? Or was he just being polite, relaying his daughter's message while secretly hoping she'd decline? Before she could overthink it, another message appeared. "That was me asking, by the way. Not just Lily. We'd really like you to come over if you're free. No obligation." Grace looked around her small apartment, at the empty Sunday stretching ahead of her. She had planned to spend the day reading, maybe doing laundry, definitely avoiding any thoughts about the Blackwell family and last night's confrontation. But the idea of pancakes with Ethan and his daughter sounded infinitely better than hiding in her apartment. "I'd love to come over," she typed. "What time and what's the address?" 20 minutes later, Grace stood in front of a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was painted a cheerful yellow with white trim, and the small front yard was dotted with evidence of a child's presence. A pink bicycle lying on its side near the porch, a collection of chalk drawings covering the driveway, a small garden with hand-painted rocks marking each plant. It looked like a home, not a showpiece or a status symbol, but an actual place where people lived and laughed and left their bikes in the yard. Grace had barely raised her hand to knock when the front door flew open. A small girl with dark curly hair and Ethan's hazel eyes stood in the doorway, grinning widely. She wore purple pajamas covered in stars and had a smudge of what looked like flour on her cheek. "You came," Lily announced triumphantly. "Dad said you might be too busy, but I knew you'd come because you promised to be his friend and friends share breakfast." "Lily, let her actually get in the door before you interrogate her." Ethan appeared behind his daughter, wearing jeans and a faded college t-shirt, looking completely different from the suited man Grace had met at the wedding, more relaxed, more himself. "Hi, Grace. Sorry about the welcoming committee." "Don't apologize for me," Lily said seriously. "Mrs. Patterson says women should never apologize for taking up space." Ethan's lips twitched. Mrs. Patterson is Lily's second-grade teacher and a feminist icon, apparently. "She taught us about Ruth Bader Ginsburg," Lily said proudly. Then she focused on Grace with the intense scrutiny only an 8-year-old could muster. "Did you really sit at a table all by yourself at the wedding? Dad said you were very brave." "Lily," Ethan started, but Grace smiled. "I did sit by myself, until your dad came and sat with me. That was brave too." Lily considered this, then nodded. Dad's brave a lot. One time there was a spider in my room, and he caught it even though he doesn't like spiders. She said this as if it were the highest compliment possible. That does sound brave, Grace agreed solemnly. Satisfied, Lily grabbed Grace's hand, her right hand, without hesitation or awkwardness, and pulled her inside. Come see the pancakes. We made chocolate chip ones because those are the best, but if you don't like chocolate, we have blueberries too. The house's interior matched its exterior warmth. The living room was cluttered in the comfortable way of homes actually lived in. Books stacked on the coffee table, a blanket draped over the couch, framed photos covering the walls. Grace noticed several pictures of Ethan and Lily, but also many of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile. Anna, Ethan's late wife. Lily dragged her into the kitchen, where a stack of slightly lopsided pancakes sat on a plate, and the counter was covered in flour and chocolate chips. Ethan followed them, looking simultaneously amused and apologetic. Sorry about the mess. Lily insisted on helping, which means we used approximately 3 times the necessary amount of flour. Cooking is messy, Lily announced. That's what makes it fun. Grace laughed, feeling some of the tension from last night finally dissolve. Your daughter is very wise. She thinks so too. Ethan grabbed plates from the cabinet. How do you take your coffee? Or would you prefer juice? Coffee would be amazing. Just a little milk if you have it. They settled around the small kitchen table, and Grace found herself in the surreal position of eating pancakes with people who, 24 hours ago, had been complete strangers. But it didn't feel strange. It felt natural, as if this were something they did every Sunday. Lily kept up a steady stream of chatter between bites, telling Grace about school and her best friend Emma and the class guinea pig named Mr. Whiskers, who ate too much lettuce and got a stomachache. Ethan interjected occasionally with corrections or clarifications, but mostly he just watched his daughter with obvious affection, sometimes reaching over to wipe chocolate from her chin or push her juice glass farther from the table's edge. The love between them was palpable, uncomplicated. This was what a real family looked like, Grace realized. Not the Blackwells' performative dinners where every conversation was monitored for social appropriateness, but this. Messy pancakes and silly stories and a father who looked at his daughter like she hung the moon. Grace, can I ask you something? Lily's voice turned serious. Sure. Why do you only have one arm? Lily! Ethan's voice was sharp with embarrassment. That's not... We talked about this. It's okay, Grace interrupted gently. She had fielded this question hundreds of times, usually from children who were simply curious without any malice. Kids were almost always easier to talk to about disability than adults. They asked direct questions and accepted honest answers without judgment. She turned to Lily. I was born this way. Some people are born with 2 arms, some people are born with 1, some people are born with no arms at all. Bodies are all different. Lily absorbed this information with the same serious expression she'd worn while discussing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Does it hurt? Nope. It's just how my body is. Can you do everything other people can do? Most things. Some things I do differently, but I can still do them. Like what? Grace thought about it. Like tying shoes. I can't tie them the way you probably learned, but I can use a different method that works just as well. Or cooking. I've learned to hold things steady with my elbow while I use my hand to chop or stir. Lily's eyes widened with admiration. That's so cool. You're like a superhero who figures out special ways to do stuff. Grace felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In 10 years, no one in the Blackwell family had ever made her feel like her adaptation strategies were anything other than unfortunate necessities. But this 8-year-old had just called her a superhero. Thank you, Lily. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. Ethan met Grace's eyes across the table, and she saw understanding there. He knew what that comment meant to her, knew how rare it was for someone to see her disability as neutral or even admirable rather than tragic. After breakfast, Lily declared that Grace needed to see her room, which apparently contained several items of extreme importance. Ethan mouthed, "I'm sorry," as his daughter grabbed Grace's hand again and led her upstairs. Lily's room was an explosion of color and creativity. The walls were painted lavender and covered with artwork, some clearly done by Lily herself, others looking more professional. A bookshelf overflowed with stories, and a collection of stuffed animals occupied most of the bed. But what caught Grace's attention was a large corkboard on one wall covered with photos. Most were of Lily at various ages, but many included a woman Grace recognized from the downstairs pictures. Anna. In one photo, Anna held a tiny newborn Lily in the hospital. In another, they made silly faces at the camera. In a third, Anna was clearly sick, her head wrapped in a scarf, her face thinner. But she was smiling at something off camera with such joy that the photo seemed to glow. "That's my mom," Lily said quietly, following Grace's gaze. "She died when I was 5. "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. "She looks like she was wonderful." She was. Lily climbed onto her bed and pulled a worn stuffed rabbit into her lap. "I don't remember everything about her, which makes me sad sometimes. Dad says that's normal, but I wish I could remember more." Grace sat on the edge of the bed. "What do you remember?" Her voice when she read me stories, she did different voices for all the characters, and I'd laugh so hard I couldn't breathe. Lily smiled at the memory. "And she smelled like vanilla, and she always knew when I was sad, even if I didn't say anything. She'd just hug me and say, 'I've got you, baby girl.' Those are beautiful memories to have. Dad talks about her a lot so I don't forget. He tells me stories about when they first met, and about when I was a baby and she would sing to me all the time." Lily looked up at Grace with those serious hazel eyes. "Do you have parents?" The question was simple, the answer complex. "I had parents who died when I was very young. I don't remember them at all. Then I was adopted by a family, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't a good fit. They weren't unkind exactly, but they didn't love me the way parents should love their children." "Like the family at the wedding? The ones who made you sit alone?" Grace nodded, impressed by Lily's perception. "Yes, like them." "That's sad," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Everyone should have people who love them right." "You're absolutely correct." Lily was quiet for a moment, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Then she said, "Dad says some families are born and some families are built. He says the people who choose to love you are just as real as the people who have to love you. Maybe even more real, because they chose." Grace felt tears threatening again. "Your dad is a very smart man." "I know." Lily grinned, the somber moment passing as quickly as it had arrived. "He's also really bad at braiding hair. Want to see?" She turned around to show Grace a lopsided braid that was already half falling out. Grace laughed despite herself. "That is pretty bad. He tries really hard, but Mom was the one who knew how to do hair stuff. Dad knows how to make pancakes and fix bikes and help with math homework, but hair is not his thing." Lily turned back around, a hopeful expression on her face. "Do you know how to braid hair?" "I do, actually." "With one hand?" Lily's voice held pure curiosity, no doubt. "With one hand. I learned when I was about your age. Want me to show you?" For the next 20 minutes, Grace sat on Lily's bed and rebraided her hair, explaining each step as she worked. Lily asked 1,000 questions about the process, about how Grace held the sections, about whether it was hard to learn. Grace answered patiently, finding joy in the child's genuine interest. When she finished, Lily ran to her mirror and gasped with delight. "It's perfect. It's so much better than Dad's braids." She whirled around. "Will you teach him, please? Then he can do it right when you're not here." "Oh, Lily, I'm sure Grace has better things to do than teach me to braid hair," Ethan said from the doorway. Grace hadn't heard him come upstairs, didn't know how long he'd been standing there. "Actually," Grace said, "I'd be happy to teach you, if you want to learn." Ethan's expression softened. "I'd really appreciate that." They spent the rest of the morning in comfortable companionship. Grace taught Ethan the basics of braiding using sections of yarn Lily found in her craft supplies, and Lily provided running commentary on his progress, which was enthusiastic if not entirely accurate. When Ethan finally managed a passable braid, Lily cheered like he'd won an Olympic medal. Around noon, Lily announced she was going to Emma's house next door for a playdate, and after a flurry of activity involving shoes and sunscreen and parental warnings about being home by 3, she disappeared in a whirlwind of energy. The house felt suddenly quiet. Grace and Ethan stood in the living room, and for the first time since she'd arrived, awkwardness crept in. Without Lily's chatter filling the space, Grace became acutely aware that she was alone with a man she'd met less than 24 hours ago, in his home, on a Sunday afternoon. "More coffee?" Ethan offered. "Sure, thanks." They moved back to the kitchen, and Ethan busied himself making fresh coffee while Grace perched on one of the counter stools. She watched him move around his kitchen with easy familiarity, reaching for mugs without looking, knowing exactly where everything was kept. This was his space, his sanctuary, and he'd invited her into it. "Thank you for coming over," Ethan said, handing her a steaming mug. "I know it was probably weird getting invited to breakfast by strangers." "Not weird," Grace said honestly. "Really nice, actually. Lily doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly, but she talked about you nonstop this morning after I told her about meeting you at the wedding. She wanted to know everything, what you looked like, what you talked about, whether you seemed nice. When I mentioned you worked at a library with children, she practically insisted I invite you over immediately. She's a special kid." "She is." Pride filled his voice. "She's been through so much. Losing Anna, adjusting to life with just me, learning to navigate a world without her mom. But she stayed so open, so curious, so kind. Sometimes I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her." Grace sipped her coffee. "You're doing an amazing job with her. Anyone can see how loved she is." "I'm trying." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Some days are harder than others. Like last week, she asked me to help her with a school project about family trees, and she wanted to include Anna. The teacher had said to only include living family members, and Lily got so upset. She said her mom was still part of our family even if she wasn't alive anymore." His voice roughened. "She was right, of course. Anna is still part of our family. She always will be." "What did you do?" "I emailed the teacher and explained the situation. She was incredibly understanding, said Lily could include anyone she wanted on her family tree. So Lily drew this elaborate tree with branches for me and her and Anna, and then she added Anna's parents and my parents and our extended family. And at the very top she wrote, 'Love lasts forever.'" Ethan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I framed it. It's hanging in my office at work." Grace felt her own eyes welling up. "That's beautiful." "She has her mom's heart. Anna was always the one who could find beauty in hard things, who could hold space for grief and joy at the same time. I'm trying to honor that, to let Lily feel whatever she needs to feel without rushing her through it." "You're doing more than trying, you're succeeding." They fell into comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and listening to the house settle around them. After a moment, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter now. "Can I ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to?" Grace nodded. "Okay. What happened last night after you left the wedding? Did the Blackwells try to contact you?" Grace pulled out her phone and opened her messages. She had 17 unread texts, all from numbers she recognized. She held the phone out to Ethan. He scrolled through them, his expression growing darker with each message. Most were from Victoria, progressing from coldly formal requests to talk to increasingly angry accusations. Several were from Richard, the adoptive father who had barely spoken directly to Grace in 10 years, suddenly demanding she call him immediately to discuss her outburst. One was from Natalie. "I can't believe you embarrassed me like that at my wedding. I thought we were family." "Jesus," Ethan muttered. "Have you responded to any of these?" "No, I don't know what to say." Grace took the phone back and set it on the counter like it might bite her. "Part of me wants to apologize, to smooth things over, to go back to how things were before, but I can't. I meant everything I said to Victoria last night." "Then don't apologize." Ethan's voice was firm. "Grace, you spoke the truth. Maybe it was uncomfortable for them to hear. Maybe it disrupted their perfect wedding narrative, but that doesn't make it any less true. You don't owe them an apology for finally advocating for yourself." "Natalie said I embarrassed her." "Natalie embarrassed herself by allowing you to be treated that way at her wedding." Ethan's anger was clear now. "She's your sister. She should have protected you, should have demanded you be seated with family, should have noticed when you were isolated and alone. Instead, she went along with her mother's cruelty and then had the audacity to blame you for speaking up about it." Grace knew he was right. She knew that Natalie's text was manipulative, designed to make Grace feel guilty for disrupting the Blackwells' carefully maintained image. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things. "I don't know how to be okay with losing them," she admitted quietly. Even though they never really had me, even though I was miserable the entire time I lived with them, I still... She struggled to find the words. I still wanted them to love me. I wanted to be enough for them. Oh, Grace. Ethan set down his coffee and moved closer. You were always enough. They were the ones who failed, not you. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're grieving, not for what you had, but for what you deserved and never got. That's a real loss, and you're allowed to feel it. He paused, then continued gently. When Anna died, everyone kept telling me I needed to be strong for Lily, needed to focus on moving forward, needed to remember that at least Anna wasn't suffering anymore. And all of that was true, but it also meant I wasn't allowed to be angry or devastated or completely lost. I had to grieve in the ways that made other people comfortable. What changed? My therapist told me grief doesn't follow rules. She said I could miss Anna and be grateful the pain was over. I could love my daughter and still have days where being a single parent felt impossible. I could be angry that Anna was gone and still cherish the time we had together. All of it could be true at once. He met Grace's eyes. You can grieve the family you never had while also knowing you made the right choice leaving them. Both things are true. Grace felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of guilt and confusion she'd been carrying since last night. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For understanding. For not telling me I should just get over it or be grateful for what I did have or any of the other things people usually say. I would never say that. Ethan's voice was serious. Your feelings are valid, Grace. All of them. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Victoria. We need to talk about your inheritance. Your father and I have been discussing your behavior, and we think it's time we revisited our estate planning. Grace felt her stomach drop. She showed the message to Ethan, whose jaw clenched. Is she seriously threatening to disinherit you? I guess so. Grace tried to keep her voice steady. Not that there was much to inherit anyway. I'm the adopted daughter, not the biological one. I'm sure everything goes to Natalie. That's not the point. The point is she's using money as a weapon to control you. Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is emotional manipulation, Grace. She's trying to scare you back into compliance. It's working. Is it? Are you actually considering apologizing just to stay in their good graces financially? Grace thought about it, really thought about it. A year ago, the threat of being cut off from the Blackwell money would have terrified her. She'd been dependent on them for everything, housing, food, money for necessities. But now? Now she had her own apartment, her own job, her own life that she'd built without their help. No, she said slowly. I'm not going to apologize. But I'm still scared. That's normal. Change is scary even when it's good change. Ethan picked up her phone. Can I make a suggestion? Please. Block their numbers, at least for now. Give yourself space to process everything without their messages constantly pulling you back into their drama. You can always unblock them later if you decide you want to engage, but right now, you need distance. It felt radical. The idea of cutting off contact with the people who had been her legal family for 10 years felt like burning not just bridges, but entire cities. But it also felt necessary. Okay, Grace said. Will you help me? I don't think I can do it alone. Together, they went through her contacts and blocked Victoria, Richard, and Natalie. Grace hesitated over Natalie's name the longest, some part of her still hoping her sister would reach out with genuine remorse instead of blame. But the text accusing Grace of embarrassing her at the wedding made the decision easier. When it was done, Grace felt simultaneously lighter and more terrified. She had just cut off her entire adoptive family. She was truly alone now, except she wasn't alone. She was sitting in Ethan Carter's kitchen, drinking coffee with a man who had shown her more genuine care in 24 hours than the Blackwells had in 10 years. How do you feel? Ethan asked. Honestly, I have no idea. Ask me again tomorrow. He smiled. Fair enough. Want to watch a movie? I'm told I have excellent taste in films, which definitely means kid-appropriate animated features since that's all Lily lets me watch anymore. Grace laughed, grateful for the shift to lighter territory. That sounds perfect. They moved to the living room and Ethan queued up a Pixar movie Grace had somehow never seen. They settled onto the couch with a comfortable distance between them, and for the next hour and a half, Grace let herself get absorbed in a story about family and belonging and finding your place in the world. When the credits rolled, she realized she'd been crying, not from sadness, but from the catharsis of seeing characters struggle with the same questions she'd been asking herself for years. "Good movie, right?" Ethan said softly. "Really good movie." They talked about the film's themes, about what it meant to honor your past while building your future, about the difference between biological family and chosen family. Ethan shared stories about Anna, about how she'd insisted family was defined by love and commitment rather than blood or law. Grace shared memories of St. Catherine's home, about the friendships she'd formed there before the adoption, about the staff members who had shown her kindness when her world felt unstable. At some point during their conversation, Grace realized she'd shifted closer to Ethan on the couch. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth, see the subtle expressions that crossed his face as he spoke. She noticed details she'd missed before. A small scar on his left eyebrow, the way his hands moved when he talked about something he was passionate about, the gentle tone his voice took when he mentioned his daughter or his late wife. She also noticed the way he looked at her, not with pity or discomfort like so many people did when they noticed her arm, not with the calculated assessment Victoria had perfected, always evaluating whether Grace's presence enhanced or diminished the Blackwell image. Ethan looked at her like she was interesting, like her thoughts and feelings mattered, like she was someone worth knowing beyond her tragedy or her disability. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. The front door burst open and Lily tumbled inside, her hair now completely escaped from the braid Grace had done that morning, her face flushed from playing outside. "Dad! Grace! Emma's mom says we can have a sleepover next weekend if it's okay with you." Ethan checked his watch and looked surprised. "Is it already 3? "Time flies when you're avoiding your problems," Grace said lightly, then winced. "Sorry, that came out more cynical than I meant." Ethan just grinned. "No, that's accurate. We've been in a lovely bubble of denial about the outside world. But now reality returns in the form of an 8-year-old requesting sleepover permissions." "Can she, Dad? Can she please?" "Let me talk to Emma's mom first, but probably yes." Lily whooped with joy and ran upstairs, presumably to pack for a sleepover that was still 5 days away. Ethan turned to Grace. "I should probably let you get home. I've monopolized your entire Sunday." "I didn't mind." Grace realized she meant it. She'd come here this morning feeling raw and uncertain, and somehow spending time with Ethan and Lily had helped her feel grounded again. "Thank you for inviting me, for the pancakes and the conversation and the movie. For all of it." "Thank you for coming." Ethan walked her to the door. "And Grace, I meant what I said last night about staying in touch. This doesn't have to be a one-time thing if you don't want it to be. Genuine. My schedule's pretty packed this week with work and Lily's activities, but maybe we could get coffee next weekend after the sleepover chaos settles down? I'd really like that." They stood in the doorway for a moment, neither quite ready to end the day. Finally, Grace forced herself to step onto the porch. "Drive safe," Ethan said, echoing his words from last night. "I will. Tell Lily goodbye for me?" "Lily!" Ethan called up the stairs. "Grace is leaving." Thundering footsteps announced Lily's return. She launched herself at Grace, wrapping her arms around Grace's waist in an enthusiastic hug. "Bye, Grace. Thanks for fixing my hair and teaching Dad how to braid and being our friend." Grace hugged her back with her one arm, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for sharing your Sunday with me." "You can share all our Sundays if you want," Lily said seriously. "We have lots of them." Grace caught Ethan's eye over his daughter's head and saw her own feelings reflected there. Surprise, warmth, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I might take you up on that," Grace said. She drove home with a full heart and an empty phone. No angry messages from Victoria, no guilt trips from Natalie, no demands from Richard, just silence and the memory of chocolate chip pancakes and a little girl who thought she was like a superhero and a widowed father who understood grief and growth in equal measure. When Grace walked into her apartment, it felt different than when she'd left that morning. Not physically, nothing had changed in the space, but something had shifted in her. She'd spent years believing that without the Blackwell family, she would be alone, that being cut off from them would mean being cut off from belonging anywhere. But today had shown her something different, Family wasn't about legal documents or shared last names or obligations enforced through guilt and money. Family was chocolate chip pancakes on a Sunday morning. It was an 8-year-old who asked direct questions and accepted honest answers. It was a father who had sat beside her at table 43 and refused to let her disappear. Family was chosen. Grace pulled out her phone and sent Ethan a message. Made it home. Thank you again for today. It meant more than you probably know. His response came quickly. It meant a lot to us too. Lily's already planning what books she wants you to recommend next time you visit. Fair warning, she's very serious about her reading list. Grace smiled and typed back. I take reading lists very seriously too. Tell her I'm ready for the challenge. She set down her phone and looked around her small apartment, at the bookshelves overflowing with stories, at the mismatched furniture she'd collected piece by piece, at the life she'd built for herself outside the Blackwell's gilded cage. It wasn't much by their standards. No crystal chandeliers or imported furniture or rooms she was afraid to touch. But it was hers. And now maybe she had the beginning of something else too. Not a replacement family, nothing could replace what she'd never had. But chosen people. Friends who saw her clearly and stayed anyway. A little girl who thought braids were magic, and a father who understood that sometimes sitting beside someone was the bravest thing you could do. Grace spent the rest of Sunday reading and doing laundry and letting herself feel all the complicated emotions swirling through her chest. Grief for the family she'd lost, or more accurately, never truly had. Relief at finally speaking her truth, fear about what came next. And underneath it all, a tentative, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. That night, as Grace lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she stumbled across a photo from Natalie's wedding that someone had posted on social media. It showed the full ballroom during dinner service, hundreds of guests at their elegant tables, the chandeliers sparkling overhead, everything picture perfect. If you looked carefully in the corner, mostly obscured by a dying palm tree, you could just barely see the edge of table 43. Grace zoomed in on that corner, on the blurry outline of herself sitting alone, and then on the moment after, when Ethan had joined her and the table had stopped being a place of exile and become something else entirely. She saved the photo, not to remember the humiliation, but to remember the moment everything changed. The moment she stopped trying to make herself smaller and started claiming space. The moment a stranger became a friend. The moment she learned that sometimes the worst tables become the site of the most important transformations. Grace set down her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would return to work at the library, would face her normal life with all its ordinary challenges. But tonight, she let herself rest in the knowledge that she had made it through. She had confronted her past, spoken her truth, and walked away with her dignity intact. And she had pancakes to look forward to next Sunday. That was enough. Monday morning arrived with rain pattering against Grace's bedroom window and the unwelcome buzz of her alarm at 6:30. She groaned and reached over to silence it, then lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing herself for the return to routine. The weekend had felt like stepping into an alternate universe, one where she had spoken her truth to Victoria, spent Sunday morning eating pancakes with new friends, and actually felt like she might belong somewhere. Now reality waited, mundane and unavoidable, in the form of a work week and the questions she'd been avoiding about what came next. Grace showered and dressed in her usual work uniform of comfortable jeans and a library-branded polo shirt, then grabbed her bag and umbrella before heading out into the drizzle. The drive to Riverside Public Library took 20 minutes through morning traffic, giving her too much time to think about the messages she'd blocked, the families she'd cut off, and the uncertain future stretching ahead. When she pulled into the library parking lot, she saw her coworker Marcus already waiting by the staff entrance, clutching his travel mug of coffee like a lifeline. Marcus was 26, perpetually exhausted from his graduate classes in library science, and one of the few people at work who treated Grace like a regular human being rather than an inspiration or a tragedy. "You look how I feel," Marcus said by way of greeting as Grace approached with her umbrella. "That bad?" "Worse. I spent all weekend writing a paper about cataloging systems that somehow ended up being 15 pages longer than required. My brain is mush." He squinted at her as she unlocked the staff door. "Actually, you look different. Did something happen?" Grace considered how to answer as they stepped inside and shook off the rain. The library smelled like old books and floor cleaner, familiar and comforting. She could tell Marcus about the wedding, about Table 43 and Victoria and Ethan, but the whole story felt too big and too raw to share in the 3 minutes before their shift started. "I'll tell you at lunch," she said finally. "That sounds ominous. Should I be worried?" "No, maybe. I don't know yet." Marcus raised his eyebrows but didn't push. One of the things Grace appreciated about him was his ability to sense when she needed space. They clocked in and began their opening routine, turning on lights, booting up computers, checking the book drop for overnight returns. Grace had worked at Riverside Library for 3 years, and the morning tasks had become meditative. She could sort returns and process holds on autopilot, letting her mind wander while her hands stayed busy. By 9 o'clock, the library doors opened to the public, and the familiar rhythm of work took over. Grace stationed herself at the children's desk, ready to help parents find board books for toddlers or chapter books for voracious third graders. She loved this part of her job. The connections formed over shared love of stories, the way kids' faces lit up when she recommended exactly the right book. The parents who came back week after week because their children trusted Miss Grace's suggestions. Around 10:30, one of her regulars approached the desk. Mia was 7 years old with thick glasses and an insatiable appetite for fantasy novels. She came to the library every Monday with her grandmother, and Grace always had recommendations ready. "Hi, Miss Grace." Mia set a stack of returns on the desk. "I finished all of these already. They were so good." Grace smiled and began checking in the books. "All 5? Mia, you're going to run out of things to read at this rate." "Grandma says that's impossible. She says there are more books in the world than anyone could read in a lifetime." "Your grandma is very wise." Grace pulled up her mental catalog of books Mia hadn't read yet. "Okay, I have 3 recommendations for you. Are you in the mood for dragons, witches, or talking animals?" "Dragons!" Mia's eyes went wide behind her glasses. "Always dragons." Grace laughed and led her to the juvenile fiction section, pulling several books she knew would be perfect. She watched Mia's face as she read the back covers, saw the exact moment the girl decided which one to take home first, and felt that familiar satisfaction of connecting the right reader with the right story. This was why she'd refused Victoria's demands to work at the Blackwell Foundation. This moment right here, helping a 7-year-old find her next adventure, mattered more than any high society charity gala or tax-deductible donation ever could. After Mia and her grandmother left with an armful of books, Grace returned to her desk to find Marcus staring at her with undisguised curiosity. "Okay, spill," he said, keeping his voice low so patrons wouldn't hear. "You've been smiling at your computer screen for the last 5 minutes. Either you're having a really good day or something happened over the weekend." Grace glanced at the clock. Still an hour until her lunch break, but the children's section was quiet, and Marcus looked determined to extract information. "I went to my sister's wedding on Saturday," she said carefully. "Oh right, the fancy society wedding. How was it?" "Terrible and then surprisingly good." Marcus pulled up a chair, settling in like he sensed a story coming. "I'm going to need more details than that." So Grace told him. Not everything. She glossed over the specifics of her confrontation with Victoria and didn't mention how deeply the isolation of Table 43 had cut. But she told him about meeting Ethan, about his kindness and his daughter, about Sunday morning pancakes, and the strange, unexpected comfort of being seen by strangers who became friends. "Wait," Marcus interrupted. "This guy just walked over and sat with you? At the reject table? That's either the smoothest move ever, or he's genuinely a good person." "I think he's genuinely a good person. And you're seeing him again? Coffee next weekend. As friends." Marcus made a face that suggested he had opinions about the as friends qualifier, but wisely kept them to himself. "Well, good for you. You deserve people who actually appreciate you instead of treating you like an obligation." He paused. "How'd your family take it when you left early?" "I didn't leave early. I left after confronting my adoptive mother about 10 years of emotional neglect and then blocking all their phone numbers." Marcus's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "You what?" "I may have burned some bridges." "Grace Taylor, you absolute legend." He set down his mug and actually applauded quietly. "I've been watching you tiptoe around that family's expectations for 3 years, trying so hard not to disappoint people who never appreciated you in the first place. It's about time you stood up for yourself." His enthusiasm made Grace smile despite the lingering anxiety. "You're not worried I made a huge mistake?" "The only mistake would be going back and apologizing. You did the right thing." Marcus's expression turned serious. "Look, I know I don't talk about my family much, but there's a reason for that. My parents kicked me out when I came out as gay at 17, told me I was an embarrassment, that I needed to change or leave. So I left, and for years I felt guilty about it. Like I should have tried harder to make them understand, should have been more patient with their bigotry." "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Most people don't. The point is, it took me a long time to realize that leaving wasn't giving up on my family, it was choosing myself. And that's not selfish. That's survival." He met her eyes. "You chose yourself, Grace. That's brave as hell." Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd been so worried about judgment from the people in her life, so afraid that cutting off the Blackwells would be seen as ungrateful or cruel. Marcus's validation meant more than she could express. "Thank you," she managed. "Anytime. Now, seriously, tell me more about this Ethan guy. Is he cute?" "Marcus." "What?" "I'm gay, not blind. I can appreciate aesthetic appeal." Grace laughed, and the tension in her chest eased. They talked for a few more minutes until patrons started arriving at the desk with questions, pulling them back into work mode. But Marcus's words stayed with her throughout the day, a reminder that choosing herself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. At lunch, Grace retreated to the break room with her packed sandwich and pulled out her phone. She'd been avoiding it all morning, afraid of what she might find. But when she checked her messages, there were only 2 new ones, one from her phone company about her bill, and one from Ethan, sent an hour ago. "Lily wanted me to tell you she finished 3 chapters of her new book during reading time at school today. She says it's already her favorite. Your recommendation skills are legendary." Grace smiled and typed back, "Tell her I expect a full book report when she finishes. And by book report, I mean an enthusiastic recap with dramatic reenactments." His response came almost immediately. "She'll love that. How's your Monday going?" "Better now," Grace wrote, then hesitated before adding, "Thank you again for yesterday. I've been thinking about what you said about grief and choosing yourself. It helped more than you know. I'm glad. And Grace? You're doing great, better than great. You're doing what's right for you, and that's not easy. Be proud of yourself." Grace read the message 3 times, letting the words sink in. Be proud of yourself. When was the last time someone had told her that? When was the last time she'd felt proud rather than apologetic about her choices? She ate her lunch and allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to constantly justify her existence or prove her worth. A future where she could simply be Grace, librarian, book lover, friend. Not the Blackwell family's charity case or their disappointing investment, just herself, complete and whole exactly as she was. The afternoon passed quickly with a steady stream of patrons. Grace helped a mother find books about divorce to help her 5-year-old understand why Daddy didn't live at home anymore. She recommended graphic novels to a reluctant reader whose teacher had given up trying to engage him. She read stories during the 3 o'clock children's hour, doing different voices for each character the way Lily had said her mother used to do. By the time her shift ended at 5, Grace felt both exhausted and accomplished. This was her life. Simple, meaningful, entirely her own. The Blackwells might have given her money and status and access to their wealthy world, but she'd built something better. Purpose. Tuesday brought sunshine and a steady stream of school groups visiting the library for research projects. Grace spent most of the day helping 4th graders find books about state history while mediating disputes over who got to use the computer stations first. It was chaotic and loud and exactly the kind of productive chaos she loved. Wednesday, she covered the evening shift and stayed until 8, helping with the weekly book club for middle schoolers. 12 kids showed up to discuss their current read, a young adult novel about a girl with a facial difference learning to advocate for herself. The discussion became heated when several kids disagreed about whether the protagonist should have confronted her bullies or taken the high road. "But standing up for yourself just makes them target you more," one boy argued. "So you're supposed to just take it?" a girl shot back. "Let people treat you badly because fighting back is too risky?" Grace let them debate, interjecting only to keep things respectful. but internally, she related to every word. She'd spent 10 years taking the high road with the Blackwells, swallowing her hurt and maintaining peace because confrontation felt too dangerous. And where had it gotten her? Isolated at table 43, still seeking approval from people who would never give it. When the discussion wound down and the kids started leaving, one girl lingered behind, Jasmine, an 8th grader who never said much during group discussions but always had thoughtful insights when she did speak. "Miss Grace?" Jasmine twisted her backpack strap nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think it's ever too late to stand up for yourself? Like if you've been letting people treat you badly for a long time, is it too late to change that?" Grace considered the question carefully, sensing there was a personal story behind it. "I don't think it's ever too late. It might be harder the longer you wait, and people might be surprised by the change. But you always have the right to set boundaries and demand respect, no matter how much time has passed. What if people get mad at you for it? Some probably will. People who benefit from you not having boundaries usually don't like it when you establish them." Grace thought about Victoria's angry texts, about Natalie's accusation of embarrassment. But their anger doesn't mean you were wrong to stand up for yourself. It just means they preferred it when you didn't. Jasmine nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Did someone used to treat you badly? Is that why you know about this stuff?" The question was direct, curious, without being invasive. Grace appreciated Jasmine's perceptiveness. "Yes," she said honestly. "And I spent a long time trying to earn their approval by being quiet and agreeable and never making waves. But recently I realized I was never going to earn what I was looking for because they weren't capable of giving it, so I chose myself instead. Was it scary? Terrifying. Still is sometimes. But you did it anyway?" "I did it anyway." Jasmine smiled, small and tentative but real. "Thanks, Miss Grace. That helps." She headed for the door, then turned back. "I hope whoever treated you badly knows they messed up. You're really cool." After Jasmine left, Grace sat alone in the empty library for a few minutes, struck by the strange circularity of life. She'd been helping kids find themselves in stories for 3 years, never quite realizing that she was still searching for her own narrative. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we were all works in progress, all trying to figure out which stories we wanted to tell about ourselves and which chapters we needed to close. Thursday afternoon, Grace's phone rang during her break. The number was unfamiliar, and she almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Grace Taylor?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes? This is Jennifer Matthews from Worthington Enterprises. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Harrison Worthington regarding a family matter." Grace's stomach dropped. Harrison. Natalie's new husband. She should have known the Blackwells wouldn't give up after a few blocked numbers. "I'm not interested in speaking with the Blackwell family," Grace said firmly. "I understand." Jennifer's voice remained neutral. "However, Mr. Worthington specifically asked me to reach out separately from his in-laws. He wanted me to convey his apologies for the seating arrangement at his wedding and to offer you an opportunity to discuss the situation if you're willing." Grace sat down heavily in the break room chair. Of all the people she'd expected to hear from, Harrison had been near the bottom of the list. Why would Harrison apologize? He's married to Natalie. He's part of the family now. "I can only relay what he asked me to communicate. He said he was unaware of how you'd been treated at the reception until after you'd left, and he wanted to make amends if possible." Jennifer paused. "He also mentioned that a colleague of his, Ethan Carter, spoke with him Monday morning about what he witnessed. Mr. Worthington was troubled by what he learned." Ethan had confronted Harrison. Grace felt a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. Gratitude mixed with concern, mixed with surprise. Ethan barely knew her, had no obligation to advocate on her behalf, and yet he'd spoken up anyway. "What exactly did Ethan tell him?" Grace asked. "I don't have those details. Mr. Worthington simply asked if you'd be willing to meet with him for coffee sometime this week. He said he owes you an apology and an explanation." Grace's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't owe Harrison anything, didn't need to make him feel better about his complicity in her exile. But curiosity gnawed at her. What had Ethan said? What had Harrison's reaction been? And more importantly, did Harrison actually feel remorse? Or was this just another attempt to smooth over the Blackwell family's image? When? Grace heard herself ask. He said any time that works for you. He'll adjust his schedule accordingly. That was surprising. Harrison Worthington III didn't adjust his schedule for anyone, especially not the adopted daughter his mother-in-law had hidden behind a dying palm tree. Friday afternoon, Grace said decisively. 4 o'clock at the coffee house on Main Street. I'll let him know. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. After Jennifer hung up, Grace sat staring at her phone, trying to process what had just happened. She texted Ethan. Did you talk to Harrison about the wedding? His response came a few minutes later. I did. Monday morning. I probably should have asked you first, but I was angry on your behalf and he needed to understand what happened. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay. His assistant just called to set up a meeting. I'm supposed to have coffee with him tomorrow. Do you want me to come with you? For moral support? The offer made Grace's chest warm. That's really kind, but I think I need to do this alone, though I might need to debrief afterward. Anytime. I'm serious, Grace. Call me after if you need to talk. Thank you. For everything. She spent the rest of Thursday trying not to obsess over the upcoming meeting with Harrison. What did he want? What would he say? Would he try to defend Victoria's actions or actually acknowledge the harm that had been done? Grace went back and forth between hope and cynicism, between wanting to believe people could change and knowing that the Blackwell family had never shown any indication of genuine growth. Friday morning crawled by. Grace was distracted at work, mixing up book recommendations and having to apologize to a confused parent who'd asked for books about cats and somehow ended up with information about volcanoes. Marcus noticed her agitation and raised his eyebrows in question, but Grace shook her head. She wasn't ready to talk about it yet. At 3:30, she left work and drove to the coffee house, a local cafe known for its excellent lattes and quiet atmosphere. She arrived early and ordered a chamomile tea, hoping the herbal blend would calm her nerves. It didn't. Harrison arrived exactly at 4 o'clock, and Grace was struck by how different he looked from the confident groom she'd watched at his wedding. He wore business casual instead of a tuxedo, and his expression was somber, almost nervous. He spotted Grace and approached her table with visible hesitation. Grace, thank you for agreeing to meet me. I wasn't sure I should, Grace said honestly. I understand. May I sit? She nodded, and Harrison settled into the chair across from her, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I owe you an enormous apology, Harrison finally said, and an explanation, though I'm not sure any explanation will be adequate. Grace waited, unwilling to make this easier for him. I didn't know about the seating arrangement, Harrison continued. Victoria handled all those details, and I trusted her judgment. I was focused on other aspects of the wedding, and when Natalie showed me the seating chart, I didn't notice where you'd been placed. I should have. That's my failure. He met her eyes. But even if I'd noticed, I'm not sure I would have understood how wrong it was until Ethan explained it to me Monday morning. What did Ethan say? Harrison's jaw tightened. He told me he'd found you sitting alone at an isolated table, visibly upset, while your family celebrated without you. He said you'd been treated like an embarrassment instead of Natalie's sister, and he asked me how I could allow that to happen at my own wedding. He paused. I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. You must have noticed how Victoria treats me, Grace said quietly. You've been around the family for 2 years. You've seen the dynamic. I have. And I'm ashamed to say I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. That every family has complicated relationships, and I shouldn't insert myself into yours. Harrison's voice was thick with regret. But Ethan was right to call me out. Silence is complicity. By not saying anything, by not questioning Victoria's treatment of you, I was endorsing it. Grace felt her throat tighten. This was more accountability than she'd expected, more self-awareness than any Blackwell had ever shown. Why didn't Natalie notice? The question came out sharper than she intended. I'm her sister. Why didn't she care where I was sitting? Harrison looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Natalie noticed. She asked her mother about it Friday night during the rehearsal dinner. Victoria told her you'd requested to sit somewhere quiet, away from crowds. Natalie believed her. And you? I didn't think to question it. He shook his head. That sounds terrible, but it's the truth. I assumed if Natalie was satisfied with the explanation, then it must be accurate. I didn't consider that Victoria might be lying or that Natalie might be accepting a comfortable narrative instead of pressing for the truth. Does Natalie know you're here? Yes. She's not happy about it. Harrison's expression turned pained. We've been fighting all week. She thinks I'm overreacting, that you were always difficult and overly sensitive about your place in the family. She doesn't understand why I'm so bothered by what happened. Grace absorbed this information. Part of her had hoped that Natalie might eventually recognize the harm she'd caused, might reach out with genuine remorse. But apparently her sister preferred to maintain Victoria's narrative rather than confront uncomfortable truths. I'm not overly sensitive, Grace said firmly. I was systematically excluded and devalued for 10 years. There's a difference. I know. I see that now. Harrison leaned forward. Grace, I can't undo what happened at the wedding. I can't change the fact that I was complicit in your mistreatment, but I want you to know that I see it now and I'm sorry. Deeply sorry. What do you want from me? Grace asked. Forgiveness? Absolution? Permission to feel better about yourself? Nothing. I want nothing from you. Harrison's voice was steady. I wanted to apologize because you deserved better and I failed to provide it. What you do with that apology is entirely up to you. Grace studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another performance. But Harrison met her gaze without flinching, without the calculated charm he usually displayed. He looked like a man genuinely grappling with his failures. I appreciate the apology, Grace said carefully. But I'm not ready to forgive yet. Maybe eventually, but not now. That's fair, more than fair, Harrison nodded. Can I ask what you're going to do? About the family, I mean? I've blocked Victoria's number, and Natalie's and Richard's. I'm done trying to earn their approval or fit into their world. Grace straightened her shoulders. I spent 10 years making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I'm not doing that anymore. Good. Harrison's response surprised her. You shouldn't. They don't deserve your energy or your efforts. That's your wife's family you're talking about. I'm aware. And I love Natalie. But that doesn't mean I have to defend her mother's behavior or pretend I don't see the damage that's been done. He paused. Ethan said something Monday that's been stuck in my mind all week. He said that real family shows up, that they sit beside you when you're alone instead of pretending not to see you. And he's right. The Blackwells have never shown up for you, Grace. They've displayed you when convenient and hidden you when not. That's not family. That's exploitation. Grace felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of Harrison Worthington, no matter how unexpectedly empathetic he was being. I need to go, she said abruptly, standing up. Of course. Thank you for hearing me out. Harrison stood as well. Grace, I know this doesn't mean much coming from me, but I hope you find people who truly see you, who appreciate you exactly as you are. You deserve that. Grace nodded once, not trusting her voice, and walked out of the cafe. She made it to her car before the tears came. Not from sadness, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of being seen, of having someone from the Blackwell orbit actually acknowledge her pain instead of dismissing it. She sat in her car crying until her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. How'd it go? Do you need to talk? Grace wiped her eyes and called him. He answered on the first ring. Hey, are you okay? I don't know, Grace admitted. Harrison apologized, like really apologized, took full responsibility. It was unexpected. He should have. What he allowed to happen was inexcusable. You really confronted him? I really confronted him. Monday morning, I walked into his office and told him exactly what I witnessed at his wedding. I probably overstepped and I might have threatened our professional relationship, but I couldn't stay silent. Ethan's voice was firm. You deserve someone to advocate for you, even if it was a guy who'd just met you. Grace felt fresh tears threatening. Thank you. No one's ever done that for me before. Then you've been surrounded by the wrong people. She could hear the smile in his voice. Are you free tonight? Lily and I are making homemade pizza, and she's been asking about you all week. No pressure if you need space, but the invitation's there. Grace thought about going home to her empty apartment, about sitting alone with all these complicated feelings. Then she thought about Lily's laughter and Ethan's kindness and homemade pizza in a warm kitchen. I'd love to come over, she said. 2 hours later, Grace stood in Ethan's kitchen with flour on her hands and tomato sauce on her shirt, laughing as Lily demonstrated her special technique for spinning pizza dough. The technique mostly involved throwing dough in the air and hoping it didn't stick to the ceiling, which had apparently happened once before based on the suspicious mark Grace noticed overhead. "Dad says I'm not allowed to try the ceiling thing anymore," Lily explained seriously. "But I think he's just worried about his security deposit." "I'm worried about gravity and our dinner ending up on the floor," Ethan corrected, but his eyes were warm with amusement. They assembled pizzas with various toppings. Lily insisted on creating a rainbow pizza with different colored vegetables arranged in stripes, while Ethan went traditional with pepperoni. Grace made one with mushrooms and olives, working efficiently with one hand while Lily watched in fascination. "How do you do that?" Lily asked. "Hold the pizza still and put toppings on at the same time." "I press the pan against my side with my elbow to keep it steady," Grace demonstrated. "It's all about finding creative solutions." "That's so cool, you're like a pizza scientist." While the pizzas baked, they sat at the kitchen table and Lily regaled Grace with stories about her week. A dramatic account of how Mr. Whiskers, the class guinea pig, had escaped his cage and been found sleeping in the book nook, a detailed description of the art project she was working on, and a passionate argument for why 8-year-olds should be allowed to stay up past 8:30 on weekends. "Lily, we've had this discussion," Ethan said patiently. "Your bedtime is 8:30 because you need 10 hours of sleep." "But Dad, if Grace is here, shouldn't I get to stay up later? It's a special occasion." "Nice try. Grace will still be our friend tomorrow when you wake up well rested." Lily sighed dramatically. "Fine, but I'm going to sleep very slowly as a protest." "I don't think that's how sleep works, kiddo." They ate dinner together, and Grace was struck again by the easy warmth of this little family. Ethan asked about Grace's meeting with Harrison, and she gave a brief summary while Lily listened with the serious expression of someone trying to understand adult complications. "So he said sorry?" Lily asked when Grace finished. "He did. And do you believe him?" Grace considered the question. "I think so. But believing someone sorry and forgiving them are different things. Mom used to say that sometimes sorry isn't enough," Lily said quietly. "She said it has to come with changed behavior, or it's just words." Ethan's expression turned bittersweet. "Your mom was very wise." "I know. I wish I could ask her stuff sometimes, like about what to do when people are mean, or how to know if someone's really your friend." Lily looked at Grace. "Did you have a mom who taught you things?" The question was innocent, without agenda. Grace chose her words carefully. "I had a mom who died when I was very young. Then I had an adoptive mother who didn't really know how to be a mom to me, so I've mostly had to figure things out on my own." "That sounds lonely." "It was sometimes, but I also learned to be strong and independent." "Is that why you're so brave? Because you had to be?" Grace felt her chest tighten. "Maybe. I never thought of myself as brave, though." "You are," Lily insisted. "Dad says brave people are the ones who are scared but do hard things anyway. And you did a hard thing at that wedding, standing up to your mean family. That's really brave." After dinner and dessert, ice cream sandwiches that Lily declared the perfect ending to a perfect meal, Lily reluctantly agreed to get ready for bed. She hugged Grace goodnight, then looked up at Ethan with a scheming expression. "Dad, since it's Friday, can Grace read me a bedtime story? Please? She's a librarian, so she's probably really good at it." Ethan looked at Grace. "You absolutely don't have to." "I'd love to," Grace interrupted. She followed Lily upstairs to her colorful bedroom, and Lily immediately pulled out her current favorite, a fantasy novel about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. Grace sat on the edge of Lily's bed and read 3 chapters, doing different voices for each character just like she did at library story time. Lily's eyes grew heavy halfway through the 2nd chapter, but she fought sleep determinedly, clearly not wanting the story to end. By the 3rd chapter, she was yawning between sentences. Grace closed the book gently. "We can read more next time," she said softly. "Promise?" Lily's voice was drowsy. "Promise." "Grace?" Lily's eyes were already closing. "I'm really glad you're Dad's friend. I think Mom would have liked you." The words hit Grace squarely in the heart. She smoothed Lily's curls back from her forehead, a gesture she'd never been able to share with Victoria or received from her, and whispered, "I think I would have liked her, too. Sleep well, Lily." Downstairs, Ethan was cleaning the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with focused attention. Grace joined him, picking up stray napkins and wiping down the table. "Thank you for reading to her," Ethan said. "She's been asking about you all week. I think she's a little bit in love with you." Grace smiled. "The feeling's mutual. She's an incredible kid, Ethan." "She is. I'm biased, but she really is." He closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." Lily hasn't bonded with anyone this quickly since Anna died. She's friendly with her teachers and classmates, but she keeps most people at arm's length. I think losing her mom so young made her wary of getting too attached. Ethan's voice was soft. "But with you, there's no hesitation. She just decided you were safe, and that was that." "I'm honored," Grace said honestly. "I am too. Having you in our lives this past week." He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "It's reminded me that we're allowed to let new people in. That opening our circle doesn't mean replacing Anna or forgetting her. It just means continuing to live and build connections." They stood in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable debris of a shared meal, and Grace felt something shift between them. Not romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but deeper than simple friendship. This was the beginning of chosen family, of people deciding to show up for each other without obligation or expectation. "I should probably go," Grace said, though she didn't really want to. "It's getting late." "Or," Ethan said carefully, "you could stay a little longer. We could watch a movie or just talk. No pressure either way." Grace thought about her empty apartment, about the solitude that had felt like freedom last weekend but now felt slightly lonely. She thought about this house full of warmth and laughter and people who seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. "I'll stay," she decided. They settled on the couch with mugs of tea, and Ethan put on a documentary about the national parks. But neither of them really watched it. Instead, they talked about Grace's work at the library and Ethan's frustrations with corporate bureaucracy, about Lily's upcoming school play, and Grace's concerns about her finances now that she'd cut ties with the Blackwells. "I've been living pretty frugally," Grace admitted, "but I was always aware that if something catastrophic happened, I could theoretically ask the Blackwells for help. Not that I wanted to or ever would have, but the safety net existed. Now it doesn't." "That's scary," Ethan acknowledged. "But you know what? You've been supporting yourself for a year without their help. You have a job, an apartment, savings presumably. You're more capable than you think." "What if I lose my job? What if I get sick or my car breaks down or—" "Then you'll figure it out the way everyone else does. You'll use your savings, you'll ask friends for help if you need to, you'll make a plan." He set down his tea. "Grace, you've been carrying this belief that you're fundamentally incapable of surviving without the Blackwells. But you've been surviving just fine. Thriving, even." Grace wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that she could build a life entirely on her own terms without the Blackwell safety net lurking in the background. But 10 years of conditioning didn't disappear in a week. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "Some days I feel strong and independent. Other days I feel like I'm one mistake away from everything falling apart. That's called being human. Everyone feels that way sometimes." Ethan shifted on the couch to face her more directly. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" "Okay." "I see someone who works a job she loves, even though it doesn't pay well because the work matters to her. I see someone who left a wealthy family rather than compromise her integrity. I see someone who is kind and patient with kids, who makes my daughter feel seen and valued, who has built a life with purpose and meaning." He paused. "I see someone who is complete exactly as she is, who doesn't need fixing or improving or anyone's approval to be worthy." Grace felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. No one had ever described her that way, as complete, as worthy, as enough just by existing. "I don't feel complete," she whispered. "I feel broken and damaged, and like I'm constantly disappointing people." "That's the story the Blackwells told you about yourself. It's not the truth." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "You get to decide your story now, Grace. You get to choose what you believe about yourself." They sat together on the couch while Grace cried. Not delicate tears, but messy, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside where she'd been storing 10 years of hurt. Ethan didn't try to stop her or tell her it was okay. He just sat beside her, steady and present, occasionally handing her tissues from the box on the coffee table. When the tears finally subsided, Grace felt wrung out but lighter, as if she'd released something toxic she'd been carrying too long. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I didn't mean to fall apart on your couch." "Don't apologize. You're allowed to have feelings. You're allowed to grieve." Ethan's smile was kind. "Besides, this couch has seen worse. Lily once spilled an entire bowl of spaghetti on it during a particularly enthusiastic dinner." Grace laughed wetly. "I think I just covered it in snot and tears. That might be worse than spaghetti." "It's a close call." They talked for another hour, the conversation wandering from heavy to light and back again. Ethan told stories about Anna, not with sadness but with affection, sharing memories that made them both laugh. Grace talked about the kids at the library, about Marcus and his dry humor, about the small joys she'd been building into her life over the past year. When Grace finally left around 11, she felt different. Not fixed. Healing wasn't that simple. But seen, known. Like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be, surrounded by exactly the right people, even if those people looked nothing like the family she'd once tried so desperately to belong to. She drove home through quiet streets, her heart full of pizza and laughter, and the beginning of something that felt remarkably like hope. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her apartment complex. A text from Ethan. "Home safe? Just pulled in. Thank you for tonight. For everything. Thank you for staying. Lily's going to ask if you can come over every Friday now. Fair warning. Tell her I'm considering it." Grace walked into her apartment, into the space that was entirely hers, and for the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel alone. She felt connected, to Ethan and Lily, to Marcus and the library kids, to the life she was building one deliberate choice at a time. She was choosing herself. And every day, that choice got a little bit easier. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost surreal in its simplicity. Grace worked her shifts at the library, helped kids discover new worlds between pages, and slowly began to believe that maybe Ethan was right. Maybe she really was enough exactly as she was. Friday nights became a standing tradition at Ethan's house, with Lily planning elaborate menus that usually involved some creative interpretation of cooking that left the kitchen gloriously messy. Grace taught Ethan to braid hair with increasing competence, though Lily still critiqued his technique with the seriousness of a gymnastics judge. On Tuesday afternoons, Grace started meeting Ethan for coffee during her lunch break. They'd sit at a corner table in the coffee house and talk about everything and nothing. His frustrations with office politics, her concerns about budget cuts threatening the library's children's programming, Lily's latest philosophical questions about life and death and why adults got to decide everything. These conversations became the highlight of Grace's week, an hour where she could simply exist without performing or proving or apologizing for taking up space. Marcus noticed the change in her immediately. "You're different," he announced one morning while they processed book returns together. "Lighter, somehow. Like someone finally turned on a light inside you." Grace smiled, running a book under the scanner. "That's oddly poetic for someone who claims to hate metaphors." "I contain multitudes. Also, I'm assuming this has something to do with the single dad you've been mysteriously meeting for coffee every week?" "We're friends." "Uh-huh. Friends who text each other good morning and share inside jokes about pancakes." Marcus raised his eyebrows knowingly. "Grace, I'm saying this with love. It's okay to let yourself be happy. You don't have to keep waiting for permission." The words stayed with Grace throughout her shift. Was she waiting for permission? Even now, free from the Blackwell's direct influence, was she still operating within the constraints they'd imposed, never asking for too much, never believing she deserved more than the bare minimum of connection and joy? That evening, Grace's phone rang just as she was settling onto her couch with a book. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Hello? Grace? It's Harrison, Worthington. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Grace sat up straighter, immediately on alert. She and Harrison had exchanged a few texts since their coffee meeting, brief check-ins where he'd ask how she was doing and she'd respond with carefully neutral updates. But he'd never called before. Is everything okay? Yes and no. Harrison sounded tired. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Victoria's planning to make a public statement about your estrangement from the family. Grace's stomach dropped. What kind of statement? The kind designed to control the narrative before you can tell your side. She's been consulting with a PR firm all week, crafting a story about how the family tried everything to help you adjust after the adoption, but you were ultimately ungrateful and troubled. How they gave you every opportunity, but you rejected their love and support. He paused. She's going to paint herself as the victim of an ungrateful adoptee who turned on the family that saved her. The room spun slightly. Grace gripped the phone tighter. She's going to lie about me publicly? She's going to control the narrative the way she always does. And unfortunately, she has the platform and connections to make people believe her version. Harrison's voice was grim. I tried to talk her out of it. So did Richard, actually. But she's convinced this is necessary to protect the family's reputation, especially after some people at the wedding started asking questions about why you were seated where you were. What do you mean people asked questions? Ethan wasn't quiet about his opinions. Several of my colleagues witnessed him sitting with you at that isolated table, and then they saw you leave early looking upset. A few of them contacted me afterward asking what happened, whether there had been some kind of family drama. Harrison sighed. In Victoria's mind, that makes you a threat. She needs to get ahead of the story before it damages the Blackwell image. Grace felt heat rising in her chest. Not anxiety this time, but anger. So, she's going to preemptively destroy my reputation to protect hers? That's the plan. I'm sorry, Grace. I know this isn't fair. When is she making this statement? Tomorrow afternoon. She's arranged interviews with 2 Society columnists, and she's planning to address it at the Blackwell Foundation's charity luncheon. He hesitated. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what's coming, and because you deserve the chance to respond if you want to. How would I respond? I don't have Victoria's connections or money or platform. Who's going to listen to me? More people than you think. The truth has power, Grace, and there are people who've watched the Blackwells operate for years who would be very interested in hearing another perspective. Harrison's voice turned careful. I can't publicly contradict my mother-in-law without destroying my marriage. But I can give you contact information for journalists who would absolutely take your call. People who specialize in exposing the gap between wealthy families' public images and private realities. Grace's mind was racing. Fight back? Tell her story publicly? The idea was terrifying. She'd spent her entire life trying to stay invisible, to avoid drawing attention to herself. Going public would mean exposing everything, the neglect, the isolation, the way the Blackwells had used her as a PR prop while treating her as an embarrassment in private. But the alternative was letting Victoria's lies stand unchallenged, letting the false narrative spread until Grace became known as the ungrateful adoptee who'd turned on her generous benefactors. Her future employers would Google her name and find Victoria's statements. Her friends would read the articles and wonder. Even people at the library might start questioning whether Grace was really as kind and stable as she seemed. Send me the contact information, Grace heard herself say. I need to think about this. I'll text it to you now. And Grace, whatever you decide, I support you. Natalie might not understand, but I do. He paused. Victoria's been getting away with this kind of manipulation for decades because no one's ever called her out publicly. Maybe it's time someone did. After Harrison hung up, Grace sat frozen on her couch, her book forgotten beside her. Her phone buzzed with Harrison's text containing 3 names and email addresses, journalists who apparently had history with the Blackwell family, who'd written previous pieces questioning the foundation's actual impact versus its publicity. She should call someone, ask for advice. But who? Marcus would tell her to fight back, but he didn't understand the full scope of Victoria's power and connections. Her other co-workers were friendly, but not close enough for this kind of crisis. And she'd already burdened Ethan with so much. Her phone was ringing before she consciously decided to call him. Grace? Hey, I was just thinking about you. Lily wants to know if you like butterflies because her class is doing a unit on insects, and apparently your opinion matters for some 3rd grade reason I don't fully understand. The normalcy of his greeting, the lightness in his voice, made something in Grace crack. Ethan, I need help. His tone changed immediately. What happened? Are you okay? Victoria's making a public statement tomorrow. About me. She's going to tell everyone I was ungrateful and troubled and that the family tried everything but I rejected their love. The words came out in a rush. Harrison just called to warn me. He gave me names of journalists who might tell my side, but I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can do this. Where are you right now? Home? My apartment. Stay there. I'm coming over. Ethan, you don't have to I'm already grabbing my keys. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He paused. Grace, you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide to do, you're not facing it alone. Exactly 14 minutes later, someone knocked on Grace's apartment door. She opened it to find Ethan standing in her hallway, slightly out of breath like he'd run up the stairs, his hair mussed from the wind. He looked at her face and immediately pulled her into a hug. Grace stiffened for just a second. She wasn't used to casual physical affection, then melted into it, her face pressed against his shoulder, breathing in the clean soap smell of him. When was the last time someone had hugged her like this? Like they genuinely cared about her pain and wanted to shoulder some of the weight? Okay, Ethan said when they finally pulled apart. Tell me everything. They sat on Grace's small couch, and she explained the whole situation, Harrison's warning, Victoria's plan, the journalist contacts, her terror about going public versus her fury at being slandered without the ability to defend herself. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. That's incredibly manipulative, he said when she finished. Victoria knows that most people will believe the wealthy philanthropist over the disabled adoptee she rescued. She's weaponizing sympathy and public perception. Which is why I don't know if I should fight back. Maybe I should just let her say whatever she wants and move on with my life. I have my job, my apartment, my friends. Do I really need to engage in a public battle with her? Do you want her lies to stand unchallenged? Grace thought about it honestly. No, but I also don't want to spend months or years locked in a media battle with the Blackwell family. I don't want my entire life to become about this conflict. That's fair. But consider this. If you don't tell your story now, Victoria's version becomes the truth. Every time someone Googles your name, they'll find articles about how you were troubled and ungrateful. Future employers, potential friends, anyone you meet, they'll all see that narrative first. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. But if you speak up now, you get to define yourself. You get to tell the truth about what really happened. And then you can move on, knowing you didn't let her rewrite history. What if no one believes me? Then they don't. But at least your truth will be on record, available for people who want to see it. He pulled out his phone. Can I see those journalist names Harrison sent? Grace showed him the text, and Ethan's eyebrows rose. These are serious journalists. Maria Chen broke that story about the Anderson Foundation embezzling donations last year. David Kim exposed that private school's discrimination scandal. These aren't society columnists writing puff pieces. These are investigative reporters who specialize in holding wealthy families accountable. That makes it more terrifying. Or more legitimate. Grace, these people would fact-check everything you say. They'd investigate the Blackwell Foundation's actual operations. They'd interview other people who've worked with or been helped by Victoria's organization. This wouldn't just be your word against hers. It would be journalism. Grace felt her heart pounding. I don't know if I'm brave enough for this. You confronted Victoria at Natalie's wedding in front of hundreds of people. You cut off your entire adoptive family. You've been rebuilding your life from scratch for a year. Ethan met her eyes. Grace, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You just don't see it yet. They talked for another hour, going through potential scenarios and outcomes. Ethan didn't push her toward any particular decision, but he helped her think through the implications of each choice. By the time he left, after making her promise to call if she needed anything, at any hour, Grace felt more clear-headed, if not exactly calm. She pulled up her laptop and started researching the journalists Harrison had recommended. Maria Chen's portfolio was impressive and intimidating. Exposés of corporate fraud, investigations into nonprofit corruption, profiles of whistleblowers who'd risked everything to tell the truth. David Kim specialized in education inequality and had written several pieces about how wealthy families manipulated admission systems and charitable giving for personal benefit. These weren't people who would take her story lightly. They would dig deep, ask hard questions, demand evidence. but they would also protect her credibility, ensure her claims were substantiated, present her story in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed. Grace spent 2 hours that night drafting an email to Maria Chen. She wrote and deleted and rewrote, trying to find the balance between honesty and dignity, between vulnerability and strength. Finally, around midnight, she settled on a version that felt true. Ms. Chen, my name is Grace Taylor, and I'm writing to you on the recommendation of Harrison Worthington. I was adopted by the Blackwell family 10 years ago when I was 12 years old. Tomorrow, my adoptive mother, Victoria Blackwell, plans to make a public statement characterizing me as an ungrateful and troubled adoptee who rejected the family's love and support. That characterization is false, and I would like to tell the true story of what it was like to be raised as the Blackwell family's public relations project rather than their daughter. I understand you may not be interested in this story or may not find it newsworthy. But I'm reaching out because I believe the public deserves to know the truth about how some wealthy families use adoption as a tool for image management rather than a genuine commitment to a child's well-being. If you're interested in speaking with me, I'm available at your convenience. Sincerely, Grace Taylor. She read it over 5 times, her finger hovering over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Once she sent this email, she couldn't take it back. She would be committing to speaking publicly about the Blackwells, to potentially destroying any remaining chance of reconciliation, to becoming the ungrateful adoptee who'd aired the family's private issues for public consumption. But she would also be telling her truth, claiming her story, refusing to let Victoria control the narrative. Grace hit send before she could second-guess herself again, then immediately closed her laptop and got ready for bed. She'd done it. Whether anything came of it or not, she'd taken the first step toward defending herself. She barely slept that night, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. But when morning came and she dragged herself to work, there was an email waiting in her inbox from Maria Chen. Grace, thank you for reaching out. I would very much like to speak with you about your experience with the Blackwell family. Would you be available for a phone interview this afternoon? I understand Victoria's planning to make her statement today, and I'd like to have your perspective on record before that happens. Best, Maria Grace stared at the email, her heart racing. This was happening. Really happening. She wrote back agreeing to a 2 o'clock interview during her lunch break, then somehow made it through her morning shift on autopilot, her mind only half present as she helped patrons find books and answered reference questions. At 1:30, Marcus found her in the break room, staring at her phone with what he described as the expression of someone about to jump off a cliff. Okay, spill, what's going on? Grace told him everything, Victoria's planned statement, Harrison's warning, her email to Maria Chen, the interview scheduled in 30 minutes. Marcus listened with increasing outrage, his face growing redder as she spoke. That manipulative witch, he said when she finished. She's actually going to publicly trash you to protect her image? That's the plan. So you're fighting back. Good. It's about damn time someone called out the Blackwell's hypocrisy. He grabbed Grace's shoulders. Listen to me. You are going to do great in this interview. You're going to tell your truth clearly and honestly, and people are going to believe you because you're genuine in a way Victoria Blackwell could never fake. You've got this. What if I don't? Then you don't, but at least you tried. At least you didn't let her silence you. Marcus pulled her into a quick hug. I'm proud of you, Grace. Really proud. At exactly 2 o'clock, Grace's phone rang. She stepped outside the library into the parking lot, finding a quiet spot away from traffic noise, and answered. Grace? This is Maria Chen. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me. Maria's voice was warm but professional, immediately putting Grace at ease. For the next hour, Maria asked careful, thorough questions about Grace's adoption, her life with the Blackwells, specific incidents that illustrated how she'd been treated, and what had finally prompted her to cut ties with the family. Grace answered as honestly as she could, her voice shaking at times but never breaking. Can you tell me about the wedding? Maria asked. Harrison mentioned something about a seating arrangement that was concerning. Grace described Table 43, the dying palm tree, sitting alone while her family celebrated without her. She explained how Ethan Carter, a colleague of Harrison's, had been the only person to join her, how that small act of kindness had helped her realize how abnormal her isolation was. And this Ethan Carter would be willing to corroborate your account? Grace hesitated. She didn't want to drag Ethan into this publicly, but Maria seemed to sense her reluctance. I don't need to quote him directly if he'd prefer to remain anonymous, but having a witness to that incident would strengthen your credibility significantly. I'll ask him, Grace said. He might be willing to speak off the record. That would be helpful. Now, I want to ask you something that may be difficult. Victoria's statement will likely focus on your disability and suggest that your challenges with integration into the family were related to your medical needs or psychological struggles adjusting to having one arm. How do you respond to that? Grace felt anger flare hot in her chest. Of course, Victoria would weaponize her disability, would frame Grace's trauma response to years of emotional neglect as evidence of instability rather than a natural consequence of mistreatment. I was born without my left forearm. That's a physical difference, not a psychological condition. I've never had significant medical needs related to my arm. I don't use a prosthetic. I don't require ongoing treatment. I manage my daily life without any issues. Grace's voice was steady now, clear. The Blackwells treated my disability as an embarrassment to be managed. Victoria would tell me to position myself in photos so my arm wasn't visible. Richard suggested multiple times that I should consider a prosthetic to look more normal. They framed my difference as something wrong with me that I needed to fix rather than simply part of who I am. And in terms of psychological struggles, I developed anxiety and depression living with the Blackwells. Not because of my disability, but because of their treatment. When you spend 10 years being told implicitly and explicitly that you're not good enough, that you should be grateful for basic necessities, that your worth is conditional on maintaining their image, yes, that causes psychological harm. But that's not a pre-existing condition. That's what happens when a child is emotionally neglected. That's very clearly stated. Thank you. Maria's tone was approving. Last question. What do you hope comes from telling your story publicly? Grace thought carefully about her answer. I hope other adoptees who've experienced similar situations realize they're not alone. I hope families considering adoption understand that taking in a child isn't a charitable act. It's a serious commitment that requires genuine love and support. And I hope the Blackwells face some accountability for using adoption as a public relations strategy rather than truly caring for a child who needed a family. She paused. But mostly, I hope I can move forward with my life knowing I didn't let Victoria's lies define me. Thank you, Grace. This has been incredibly helpful, and I'm grateful for your honesty. Maria's voice warmed. I'm going to write this piece tonight and have it published tomorrow morning. I'll send you a draft to review before it goes live. You'll have the chance to approve any direct quotes and flag anything you're uncomfortable with. Sound good? Yes, thank you. After they hung up, Grace sat in her car for 10 minutes, adrenaline slowly draining from her system. She'd done it. She'd told her story to a journalist who would present it to the world. There was no taking it back now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. How did it go? Grace called him instead of texting back. I think I just potentially ruined the Blackwell family's reputation. Good. They've earned it. She could hear the smile in his voice. Seriously, though, how do you feel? Terrified, relieved, like I might throw up, all of the above. That sounds about right. Are you working the rest of the day? Until 5. Come over after your shift. We're having a celebration dinner because you just did something incredibly brave and you deserve pancakes for dinner like the champion you are. Grace laughed despite her anxiety. Pancakes for dinner? Lily's rules, not mine. She says breakfast food is appropriate for any important occasion, and this qualifies. That evening, Grace sat at Ethan's kitchen table eating pancakes with fresh strawberries while Lily peppered her with questions about what it felt like to talk to a real journalist. Ethan had apparently explained in age-appropriate terms that Grace was doing something brave to stand up to people who hadn't treated her well, and Lily had decided this made Grace basically a superhero. Did you feel scared? Lily asked, drowning her pancakes in syrup. Very scared. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. That's what brave means. Lily nodded sagely. Mom always said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the thing anyway because it's right. Grace met Ethan's eyes across the table and saw her own emotions reflected there. Gratitude for Anna's wisdom that lived on through her daughter, appreciation for the way Lily could distill complex adult situations into simple truths, and something deeper that Grace wasn't quite ready to name yet. After dinner, while Lily was upstairs getting ready for bed, Ethan poured them both wine and they sat on the back porch watching fireflies dance in the yard. Maria asked if you'd be willing to speak with her, Grace said quietly, to corroborate what happened at the wedding. I told her I'd ask, but I completely understand if you don't want to get involved. I'll talk to her. Ethan's response was immediate. What I witnessed that night was wrong, and I'm willing to say so publicly. Harrison's my friend, but that doesn't mean I'll stay silent about how his wedding treated you. It might damage your professional relationship with him. Harrison already knows how I feel. We had a long conversation about it after the wedding. That's why he's been supporting you through all this. Ethan turned to look at her. Grace, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I pity you or because I think you need rescuing. I'm doing this because what happened to you was wrong, and I have a responsibility as a witness to speak up. That's it. That's not it, though. Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. You've done so much more than just witness. You've invited me into your home, into your life, into Lily's life. You've shown me what real friendship looks like, what chosen family means. Why? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the fireflies. When Anna was dying, we had a lot of conversations about what came after. She made me promise that I wouldn't shut down, wouldn't close off from the world just because losing her hurt so much. She said life was meant to be lived in connection with other people, and that Lily and I deserved to keep building our family even after she was gone. He turned to Grace, and in the porch light, his eyes were bright with emotion. The truth is, I started sitting with you at that wedding because of Anna's voice in my head telling me never to let someone eat alone. But I kept sitting with you, kept inviting you over, kept making space for you in our lives because you make our lives better. You make me laugh. You challenge me to think differently. You're patient and kind with Lily in a way that honors Anna's memory while also being completely your own. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know what I did to deserve you and Lily. You don't have to deserve love, Grace. That's the whole point. You don't have to earn it or prove you're worthy of it. It's just freely given because you exist and you're you, and that's enough. Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand. I know you're not ready to hear this yet, but I'm going to keep showing you until you believe it. You are enough, exactly as you are. With all your fear and strength and vulnerability and courage, all of it. Enough. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands loosely linked, watching darkness settle over the yard. Grace felt something shifting inside her, some fundamental belief about her own worthlessness beginning to crack and let light through. It would take time to fully internalize what Ethan was telling her, time to unlearn 10 years of conditioning that had taught her she was only valuable in proportion to her usefulness and gratitude. But sitting here on this porch, with fireflies dancing and Ethan's steady presence beside her and Lily's laughter drifting down from her bedroom window, Grace could almost believe it might be possible, that she might actually be enough. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Grace pulled it out and saw a message from Maria Chen with the subject line, "Draft article for your review." "It's here," she told Ethan. "The article. Do you want to read it now or wait?" Grace thought about it. Part of her wanted to wait, to preserve this moment of peace before facing whatever Maria had written, but another part knew that putting it off would just mean hours of anxiety and speculation. "Now," she decided. "Will you read it with me?" They moved inside to the couch, and Grace opened the email on her phone. The article was long, over 2,000 words, and detailed. Maria had clearly done research beyond just Grace's interview, including quotes from people who'd worked with the Blackwell Foundation, anonymous sources who'd witnessed Victoria's treatment of Grace over the years, and yes, a statement from Ethan about what he'd observed at the wedding. The piece was titled, "The Price of Philanthropy: When Adoption Becomes Image Management." It opened with a description of Table 43, then dove into Grace's full story. But Maria hadn't just presented it as a sob story about a mistreated adoptee. She'd framed it within a larger investigation of how wealthy families use charitable giving and adoption as tools for reputation enhancement, citing several other similar cases where children had been adopted primarily for PR purposes. The article quoted Grace directly in several places, but always in context, never making her sound pitiful or bitter. Instead, she came across as thoughtful and honest, someone who'd survived difficult circumstances and was now choosing to speak up not for revenge, but for accountability. Near the end, Maria had included a devastating paragraph comparing the Blackwell Foundation's public statements about supporting vulnerable children with specific examples of how Grace had been treated. The separate table at family events, the pressure to hide her disability, the emotional isolation. The contradiction was stark and damning. The article concluded with Grace's hope that her story might help other adoptees feel less alone and might encourage families to approach adoption with genuine commitment rather than calculating self-interest. When Grace finished reading, she looked up at Ethan with wide eyes. "She made me sound strong." "Because you are strong." "No, I mean, she didn't make me sound like a victim or someone to feel sorry for. She presented me as someone who survived and chose to speak truth. That's not how I see myself at all." "Maybe it's time you started," Ethan smiled. "Grace, this article is powerful. It's fair but unflinching. And yes, it makes you sound strong because that's the truth Maria saw when she interviewed you." Grace read through it again, making minor edits to a few quotes for clarity, but leaving the substance unchanged. Then she sent her approval back to Maria with a note of gratitude for the respectful, thorough way she'd been treated. The article would publish in the morning, going live just a few hours before Victoria's planned public statement at the charity luncheon. Grace tried to imagine Victoria's face when she read it, when she realized that Grace had gotten ahead of the narrative and presented a version of events that couldn't be easily dismissed. She felt a fierce satisfaction at that image, followed immediately by guilt. Was it wrong to take pleasure in potentially damaging Victoria's reputation? Was she being vindictive rather than simply truthful? "Stop," Ethan said, apparently reading her expression. "I can see you spiraling. You're allowed to feel good about standing up for yourself. That's not vindictiveness, that's justice. What if Victoria's statement is really damaging? What if she has evidence I don't know about that makes me look bad? Then Maria will investigate it and print corrections if necessary. That's how journalism works. But Grace, Victoria's been controlling narratives through manipulation and money for decades. She's not used to someone actually challenging her with facts and documentation. I don't think she's prepared for this." Lily appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas. "Dad, I can't sleep. Can Grace read me another story?" Grace looked at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. I'll clean up down here." Upstairs in Lily's room, Grace read 3 chapters of a new book about a girl who discovered she had magical powers she couldn't control. Lily listened intently, occasionally asking questions about whether having powers you couldn't control would be scary or exciting or both. "Both," Grace said. "Important things are usually scary and exciting at the same time. Like you talking to that journalist today." "Exactly like that." "I think you're really brave," Lily said sleepily. "And I'm glad you're our friend. I asked Dad if maybe you could be more than our friend, like maybe you could be our family, and he said that's up to you and him to figure out. But he hopes so too." Grace's breath caught. She looked down at Lily, whose eyes were already closing, apparently unaware of the bombshell she'd just dropped. Family. Ethan hoped they could be family. She finished the chapter even though Lily had fallen asleep halfway through, then sat for a moment just watching the little girl breathe, her face peaceful in sleep. Grace thought about Anna, about the woman whose wisdom lived on in her daughter's straightforward kindness, about the space in this family that had opened up not to replace what was lost, but to expand into new configurations of love. Downstairs, Ethan was loading the dishwasher when Grace returned. He looked up with a question in his eyes. "She asleep?" "Yeah. Dropped off in the middle of chapter 2. Grace paused, trying to find the right words. "Ethan, Lily said something about me potentially being family, about you hoping—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Had Lily misunderstood? Had she projected her own wishful thinking onto her father's words? But Ethan didn't look surprised or uncomfortable. He just smiled, soft and a little nervous. "I probably should have brought this up directly instead of letting my 8-year-old handle the communication. But yes, I do hope that. Eventually. If you're interested." "I'm interested," Grace said quietly. "I'm also terrified. I don't know how to be part of a family, Ethan. The Blackwells were my only example, and I failed at that spectacularly." "You didn't fail. They did." He closed the dishwasher and turned to face her fully. And family doesn't look the same for everyone. For us, it would look like what we've already been building: Friday night dinners and Tuesday coffee dates, and being there for each other when things get hard. We're already doing it, Grace. We're just giving it a name. Chosen family. Exactly. Ethan took a step closer. Look, I know the timing is complicated with everything happening with the Blackwells. And I know you need time to heal from that trauma before you can fully trust new relationships. I'm not pushing for any kind of timeline or commitment. I just wanted you to know that Lily and I see you as family already. The rest can unfold however it needs to. Grace felt overwhelmed by the simple generosity of the offer. No pressure, no expectations, just an open invitation to belong whenever she was ready to accept it. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for including me, for making space. Thank you for trusting us with your heart after it's been broken so many times. That takes real courage. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the dishwasher humming quietly in the background, neither quite ready to break the moment. Then Grace glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly 10. I should go. You have work tomorrow and I have the early shift at the library. Okay, but Grace? Ethan walked her to the door. Whatever happens tomorrow when the article publishes and Victoria makes her statement, remember, you're not alone. You have people now. Marcus and Lily and me. Harrison too, apparently. You have people who will stand with you. Grace drove home with those words echoing in her mind. You have people. Such a simple statement, but one that held enormous weight for someone who'd spent most of her life feeling fundamentally alone. She did have people now. She'd built connections, formed relationships, created a chosen family that showed up not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. In her apartment that night, Grace prepared for bed with an unfamiliar feeling settling in her chest. It took her a while to identify it, to put a name to the sensation that was simultaneously grounding and uplifting. Then she realized this was what belonging felt like. Not the performative belonging she'd tried to achieve with the Blackwells, but real belonging. The kind that came from being seen fully and accepted completely. She fell asleep thinking about tomorrow, about the article that would publish, about Victoria's reaction, about the potential fallout and consequences. She was scared, yes. But underneath the fear was something stronger, the certainty that she'd done the right thing. That speaking her truth, claiming her story, and refusing to let Victoria's lies define her was worth whatever came next. And she wouldn't face it alone. Morning arrived with gray skies threatening rain, and Grace's alarm piercing through dreams she couldn't quite remember. She reached for her phone with a sense of dread pooling in her stomach, knowing what she would find. The article had published at 6 a.m., exactly as Maria had promised. Grace opened her browser, and there it was, featured prominently on the news site's homepage, The Price of Philanthropy, When Adoption Becomes Image Management. Her own face stared back at her from the accompanying photo, a picture she'd sent Maria yesterday, one of the few photos she had where she looked confident and at ease, taken by Marcus at a library event last year. The article had already accumulated over 300 comments and had been shared dozens of times on social media. Grace's hands trembled as she scrolled through some of the responses, bracing herself for cruelty or disbelief. But most of the comments were supportive, even angry on her behalf. This is heartbreaking. No child should be treated as a PR prop. I've always wondered about the Blackwell Foundation. This explains so much. Good for Grace Taylor for speaking up. We need more people willing to expose this kind of hypocrisy. There were negative comments too, of course. People defending Victoria, people suggesting Grace was exaggerating or seeking attention, people who couldn't believe a wealthy family would truly mistreat an adopted child. But they were outnumbered by messages of support, and several commenters who identified themselves as adoptees shared similar experiences with families who'd adopted them for the wrong reasons. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. You are a legend. Have you seen the article? It's everywhere. I'm so proud of you I could cry. Actually, I am crying. Call me when you're up. Then one from Harrison. The article is excellent, fair and factual. Victoria is furious, which means you did something right. Stay strong today. And finally, Ethan. Good morning. The article is perfect. You're perfect. Lily made you a card to celebrate your bravery and insists on delivering it personally. Can we stop by the library during your lunch break? Grace felt tears welling up, but they were different from the tears she'd cried so often over the past few weeks. These weren't tears of pain or grief or fear. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the overwhelming recognition that she had people who cared about her enough to celebrate her courage, rather than shame her for disrupting the status quo. She got ready for work in a daze, her mind half on the article and half on what Victoria's response might be. The charity luncheon was scheduled for noon. Would Victoria go through with her planned statement now that Grace's version of events was already public? Or would she pivot, try to spin the article as lies and manipulation? By the time Grace arrived at the library, she'd received 17 text messages, 6 emails, and 2 voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. Most were from reporters requesting interviews or follow-up comments. One was from a woman who identified herself as a former Blackwell Foundation board member and wanted to speak with Grace about other concerning incidents involving the Foundation's operations. Grace saved that number for later, too overwhelmed to process what it might mean. Marcus was waiting for her at the staff entrance, practically vibrating with excitement. "Grace Taylor, you absolute icon, you magnificent truth teller, you are my hero." "Marcus, it's 7:45 in the morning. How are you this energetic?" "I've had 4 cups of coffee, and I'm running on pure adrenaline and righteous fury." He pulled her into a tight hug. "Seriously, though, that article was incredible. Maria Chen presented your story with so much dignity and power, and the way she connected it to larger patterns of wealthy families using adoption as PR, chef's kiss. Brilliant." "I'm terrified," Grace admitted. "Victoria's statement is at noon. What if she has something that makes me look like a liar?" "Then Maria will investigate and report on that too. But Grace, you told the truth. You have Ethan as a witness. You have documentation of your living situation for the past year. You have a decade of being excluded from family events. Victoria can spin all she wants, but facts are facts." They clocked in and began their opening routine, but Grace couldn't focus.